In the quiet, rural corners of America, an untold horror unfolds under the veil of night. It's a recurring nightmare that has haunted farmers for over 50 years, a mystery where the victims are livestock and the perpetrator defies human logic. This is not the work of wolves or coyotes. This is calculated, precise, and utterly bloodless. They call them cattle mutilations. For decades, investigators have been chasing ghosts, yet the evidence points increasingly toward a non-terrestrial solution. Tonight, we peel back the layers of this gruesome enigma, from the unnerving surgical precision to the alarming forensic evidence that suggests we are dealing with a technology far beyond our own, exploring the terrifying possibility that these mutilations are not random acts of cruelty, but part of a global, non-hostile alien agenda. The typical mutilation scene is a study in contradictions. A lifeless animal, often a cow, found intact, yet vital organs have been expertly removed. The cases cluster in areas known for high UFO activity, like the vast San Luis Valley in Colorado. Ranchers like Mike Duran, who discovered one of his cows with the udders and female genitalia cleanly removed, consistently testify that the acts are unlike any natural predator kill. The most chilling aspects of these scenes are universal. Organs like the genitals, eyes, tongues, and ears are surgically removed with uncanny finesse. The animal's blood is entirely drained, yet there is no blood at the crime scene. Crucially, there is a complete absence of evidence. No human footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of struggle, implying the animals were never even on the ground during the procedure. The cuts themselves are the most damning clue. Duran described them as not being made by a knife, but looking like they were cut and cauterized at the same time, clean, like a laser. The sophistication of these cuts is what first broke the earthly paradigm. They are performed with such cellular precision that tissues immediately adjacent to the cut line show no trauma whatsoever, a feat impossible with current human surgical tools, which always leave microscopic cell tearing. This technological signature, coupled with the mysterious nature of the attack, often leads the ranchers themselves to an extraterrestrial conclusion. As Duran stated, upon seeing the scene, his first thought was, "They're back." This initial visceral reaction of the witnesses strongly suggests that the level of precision and the manner of the operation are entirely foreign to our world, hinting at a non-human operative utilizing methods we can only dream of. The mystery transitioned from folklore to forensic science, with the work of individuals like Philip Hoyle, former director of the Animal Pathology Research Unit in the UK. Hoyle spent years investigating these cases, and his findings are arguably the most compelling link to an extraterrestrial hypothesis. He stressed that when examining the wounds under a microscope, one realizes they are not looking at a mere knife wound. Some of the tissue appeared to be unzipped, implying a molecular-level disintegration rather than a cut. The cuts were clean, precise, clinical, and perfectly aligned. He unequivocally stated that the technology used is frankly terrifying and clearly, absolutely clearly, more advanced than anything we currently possess on Earth, suggesting a civilization thousands of years ahead of us. The most shocking evidence came from a substance often found at the wound site, a black, putty-like paste. Analysis revealed this to be degraded hemoglobin, but with a crucial distinction. The red and white corpuscles had been separated using a centrifuge. Hoyle emphasized that this sophisticated process can only be done in a high-tech, controlled laboratory setting. The fact that this specific forensic signature is found on a cow carcass in a remote field utterly invalidates any theory involving earthbound predators or cultists. This finding points directly to a high-level, technologically advanced scientific operation, a kind of biosignature left by the craft's internal environment or procedures. Based on the combination of the sterile cuts and the lack of ground evidence, Hoyle developed a chilling theory about the perpetrator's method of operation. He hypothesized that the entities are using transference beams, essentially anti-gravity beams, to silently levitate the animal off the ground and on board the craft where the surgical procedure is done, before placing it back down. This zero-friction transport system is deemed the only rational explanation for the complete lack of evidence or disturbance surrounding the animal when it is discovered. This hypothesis is further corroborated by hundreds of farmer testimonies reporting strange phenomena coinciding with the mutilations. Bright spheres of light, orbs, and UFOs operating in non-traditional, non-aerodynamic flight patterns, exhibiting speeds and instantaneous directional changes unlike any known human aircraft or helicopter. These sightings are often described as silent, hovering craft operating with a purposeful, stealthy efficiency. If the evidence points to superior technology, the question then becomes why. Hoyle believes the objective is not malevolent, but rather a global surveillance program. He suggests that various alien intelligences have a vested interest in planet Earth and humanity, and they are systematically sampling the environment by removing specific, regenerative tissues and glands from livestock on a global scale. Their primary goal is to monitor the food chain and the environment by collecting genetic materials and tissues, which are then transported off-world for their ultimate purpose, perhaps to monitor the effects of our pollution or disease on Earth's delicate biological systems. Hoyle argues that these entities are not hostile. They genuinely care about our welfare. He views their actions as a meticulous global stewardship of the biosphere, operating in secret to prevent mass panic, because revealing the full extent of this intervention would undoubtedly cause societal collapse. The most curious element of the cattle mutilation phenomenon is not the technology, but its apparent decline in recent years. While high-profile, undeniable cases still surface sporadically, the sheer volume and geographical concentration seen in the 1970s and 1980s have largely diminished. If these acts were the result of a global, systematic extraterrestrial program, why the sudden lull? One major hypothesis within the UFO and mutilation research community, and one that aligns with Philip Hoyle's theory, is that the sampling mission has largely been completed. If the objective was to gather sufficient genetic and tissue samples from the global food chain to establish a baseline of planetary health and monitor the effects of human environmental impact, pollution, pesticides, disease, then the entities may have simply collected enough data. The operation moved from a high-volume data collection phase to a low-volume maintenance or monitoring phase. Essentially, once the initial biological census was complete, the need for dozens of mutilations per year vanished. Furthermore, the decrease might reflect a shift in the alleged alien agenda. If the animal sampling was preparatory to the human breeding program detailed by David Jacobs, perhaps the resources and focus have been redirected entirely. Once the necessary environmental data was correlated with the accelerating human hybridization program, the entities may have pivoted their surveillance efforts away from the fields and more directly towards human abductions and the quiet integration of hybrids into society. The animals provided the necessary biological context. The humans now provide the necessary genetic material and host environment. Therefore, the recent decline in cattle mutilations may not be evidence that the phenomenon was fake, but rather chilling proof that the entities involved are efficient, goal-oriented, and highly successful. They accomplished their mission, gathered their required materials, and have now moved silently onto the next, perhaps far more invasive phase of their complex operation on Earth. The lack of new evidence doesn't signify peace. It might simply mean the surveillance has become so sophisticated and so targeted that we are no longer equipped to detect it. The evidence is complex, frightening, and undeniable. Now we turn the question to you. Do you believe the mutilations are proof of an ongoing alien agenda? Or is there a terrestrial explanation we haven't uncovered? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Your speculation and analysis fuel the search for truth. If you found this investigation compelling, please hit the like button, share this video with fellow truth seekers, and most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Don't let the mystery go unsolved. There is a very specific time when Route 54 becomes lethal, 2:11 a.m. If your radio cuts out, your GPS dies, and your phone connects to 911 by itself, don't bother hitting the brakes. They've already found you. If that unsettled you, wait until you hear what happened at exactly 2:11 a.m. Leona Ward was a 911 operator in the quiet, isolated town of Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The town's official population stood at 2,744, a figure that felt generous on most days. For 12 years, Ward had mastered the familiar, often comforting rhythm of the desert and the deep silence of the graveyard shift. She recognized the voices of the local farmers, the teenagers pulling harmless pranks, and the lonely elderly residents seeking reassurance. She knew her routine, her town, and her job. Santa Rosa existed primarily as a necessary pit stop on Route 54, the kind of place travelers only glanced at. They would fill their gas tanks, grab beef jerky and a Coke, use the facilities at the Love's truck stop, and then immediately vanish back onto that endless ribbon of black highway. Route 54 was a north-south artery cutting through the desolate desert, linking Tucumcari to the north with Alamogordo to the south. Most of the territory it traversed was empty land, stunningly beautiful in the harsh light of dawn, yet utterly devoid of human presence, and profoundly lonely. Ward insisted she wasn't crazy, despite questioning her own sanity countless times. She was compelled to recount everything that had happened, detailing the terrifying, precise pattern that began exactly at 2:11 a.m. The beginning of the nightmare was the transition from Thursday night to Friday morning, March 14, 2019. Ward was seated at her console, anticipating the usual quiet inertia of the early morning hours. At precisely 2:11 a.m., her headset exploded with sound. It wasn't the sound of a bad signal or typical cell interference. It was a dense, heavy, unnatural static, a sound so saturated it felt physically palpable, as though the caller was trapped beneath tons of water or broadcasting from a distant, vibrating star. The sheer wrongness of the sound sent a shiver down her spine, raising the hairs on her arms. Piercing this sonic wall was the desperate, trembling voice of a young man, Michael Valdez. He claimed he was driving his gray 2015 Honda Civic on Route 54 and was being pursued by lights in the sky. The terror in his voice was not manufactured, it was raw, primal fear. Valdez reported a complete systems failure. His radio, GPS, and cell phone were dead, yet somehow, miraculously, the 911 line had connected. He sounded like a man drowning in technological isolation. The data screen offered no comfort. Ward's console remained stubbornly blank. No coordinates, no tower triangulation, no incoming log-nothing to anchor the call in reality. She could hear his panicked breathing, the frantic details of his vehicle, and his increasing desperation. He described seeing shapes within the pulsing light and screamed for immediate help before the line instantly went dead. There was no fading, no clicking, just an instantaneous, complete severance of the connection. Ward dispatched Officer Ruben Marquez. While waiting, she checked her logs. The horrifying reality sunk in. Her system showed no record of the call ever being placed. The only remnant was an automated recording file that, chillingly, was exactly 8 seconds long and contained nothing but the heavy, underwater static. The 4 minutes of desperate conversation she had just experienced had simply been erased from the system's memory. At 2:34 a.m., Marquez reported back. He had found no sign of the Honda Civic. The highway was desolate, just as it usually was at that hour. The final, unsettling confirmation arrived hours later from the Albuquerque police. Michael Valdez was safely home, having been asleep since midnight. His gray Civic was cold and dusty, confirmed not to have been driven for days. Valdez had been at his residence, yet Ward knew with absolute certainty that she had heard a more perfect echo of him screaming into the void on Route 54. Officer Marquez later confided in Ward. Though he initially dismissed it as an atmospheric anomaly, what he saw at 02:45 a.m. near mile marker 290 was impossible. He described an intensely bright white light hovering miles off the highway. It did not drift or accelerate. It abruptly teleported a significant distance south. Then, with an acceleration that defied all known physics, faster than any fighter jet or space shuttle launch, it shot straight up into the black sky and vanished. Marquez, a man whose professional credibility was everything, was visibly shaken by the impossibility of the sighting. The silence that followed the Valdez incident lasted 3 weeks, but for Ward, it was merely an anticipation. The dread became reality on April 4th at exactly 02:11 a.m. The headset erupted with the exact same, uniquely terrifying dense static. This time, the panicked voice belonged to Sarah Baker. She was also on Route 54, and her terror was fueled by recognition. She mentioned seeing the news story about the other people, indicating the phenomenon was already known in hushed rumors or local reports. Sarah described a massive object hovering directly above her blue Ford Escape. The object was enormous, not a plane, emitting pulsing red and white lights. She detailed a visceral sensory assault, a deep, powerful humming sound that didn't just rattle the car, but vibrated through her body, causing excruciating pain in her teeth and bones. It was a physical violation transmitted through sound. She then whispered that she saw something opening up beneath the object, revealing a blinding white light, and within that light, dark shapes, too tall, too thin, confirming her deepest fear. They can't be human. The line cut out instantly. The outcome was identical. Sarah Baker was later confirmed to be safe at home in Las Cruces, her vehicle in her garage, having never left. The call log remained blank, and the recording was 8 seconds of static. The pattern was sealed. In the following months, their 02:11 a.m. calls continued. Ward logged them mentally, knowing her system wouldn't retain the evidence. The victims were found safe at home, yet their cars were discovered abandoned on Route 54. Ward knew these people had been subjected to something traumatic and invasive. They were safe, but deeply tampered with. The authorities began to focus on the vehicles themselves. The most chilling commonality was the ritualistic evidence left behind. The abandoned cars were always found centered and perfectly framed within a perfect triangular shape, formed by 3 large, circular, thermal burn marks etched into the asphalt. These scorch marks were meticulously spaced approximately 47 feet, about 14 meters apart. Forensic analysis confirmed the pavement beneath the car was still warm, indicating the powerful thermal energy had been focused and released just moments before the car was left behind. This geometric precision ruled out natural phenomena or any conventional explanation. It suggested a controlled, measured operation, a harvest, a retrieval, or a signal. By December 2025, 2 years after the initial incident, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Leona Ward was no longer a lone operator dealing with an anomaly. She was the central, critical component of a joint task force comprising the FBI and the New Mexico State Police. Her dispatch office was now a field command post, equipped with specialized surveillance and recording devices. The mission was clear: intercept the next event and secure evidence. The tension in the office was almost unbearable. Tonight is Saturday, December 6th, 2025. The clock shows 2:08 a.m. Only 3 agonizing minutes remain until the expected time of contact. FBI agents are stationed silently in the adjacent room, monitoring multiple feeds. Recording devices are active and being double-checked. A fully prepared response team is standing by directly on Route 54, strategically positioned and ready to move. Ward's hand is firmly on her headset, her notebook open and her pen poised. She had stopped feeling fear long ago. Now, there was only determination. In 3 minutes, Ward will find out if all their preparation is enough. She is the nexus point, the only reliable constant in the phenomenon. The truth they seek is about what has been taking people off the highway, what has been utilizing their 911 dispatchers as a means of communication, and what has been deliberately leaving those perfect triangular burn marks a signature in the desert. The clock reads 029. The entire fate of understanding this phenomenon rests on the next 120 seconds. Ward concludes her account with the same chilling professional warning she issues to the task force. Route 54 between Santa Rosa and Vaughn is a kill zone at 2:11 a.m. If you are there and your GPS fails, your radio cuts to static, and your phone connects to only one number, 911. We will hear you. We will document your call. We will send help as fast as we can, but the question remains, are we ready for what happens next? This testimony you are listening is my attempt to bring the truth of Route 54 out into the light, and I need your help to keep it visible. If you find this information compelling, if you believe this phenomenon needs to be investigated further, please hit that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up, and share your theories in the comments below. Your support ensures this message and the patterns we uncover can't be easily silenced. In the Central Valley, night usually settles like dust. Jade Carrion knew that darkness well. Harvest season teaches you the logic of orchards, pump lights, distant traffic, honest shadows. That is why the line shook her so fast. It didn't flash into view, it was just there, suspended above the citrus canopy, a pale blue stroke, perfectly straight, perfectly still. No source, no spill, no shadow on the leaves below. It looked less like light and more like a mark someone had drawn across the world. The longer she watched, the more her body reacted. First, a low vibration she felt in her chest, then a sense that air had thickened around that strip of sky. The orchard stayed familiar, but the space beneath the line felt controlled, like an invisible rule was being enforced. She raised her phone to document it. The camera refused to focus, as if reality itself didn't want a record. Jade managed a 180-acre orange ranch outside Visalia. October meant long days and late nights, irrigation checks, and a routine so familiar it felt safe. She had thought the valley's darkness was empty. She was wrong. Jade stayed late to check irrigation in the North 40. The grove was empty, rows of orange trees turning into dark tunnels, only the occasional click of a valve breaking the quiet. She saw the blue line because it made the air feel split. It hovered above the canopy, perfectly straight and level, stretching across multiple rows like a ruler had been dragged through the night. It didn't spill light onto leaves, didn't cast shadows, didn't flicker. It just existed, clean-edged and unreal. A low vibration settled into her chest, more felt than heard, steady like a machine holding a constant note. Jade lifted her phone to record. The camera refused to lock onto it, snapping focus to branches and back to darkness, leaving the line as a smear on the screen. She tried again, same result. When she lowered the phone, the line was still razor-sharp to her eyes. No glow on the ground beneath it, no mark, just normal soil and fallen leaves under something that shouldn't be there. She backed away slowly, keeping it in sight. The vibration stayed calm and unchanged, as if she'd stepped into the edge of a monitored zone, and whatever drew that line had no urgency at all. She called Reagan, her husband, to come back to the grove. When he arrived, he didn't speak at first, just stared up, then stepped under the blue line like he was testing an invisible boundary. The change was immediate. The air didn't get colder so much as wrong. Sound thinned, like the orchard had been wrapped in glass. The hum sank deeper into Jade's ribs until it stopped feeling like noise and started feeling like pressure. They called CHP. The dispatcher didn't ask follow-up questions, didn't sound curious, just ran a script and ended the call too cleanly. Then the valley reacted anyway. Up on Highway 99, traffic bunched and stopped in uneven clusters. People stepped out and looked up in the same direction, quiet in the same way. And above the asphalt, more lines had appeared, not beams, not lasers, but perfect pale blue strokes suspended in the air, holding their place like a measurement drawn onto the sky. Jade stared long enough to notice the spacing. Parallel, precise, not random. A few cars tried to inch forward under them. Most didn't. Because the moment the first car rolled too close, brake lights rippled down the line like the whole road had flinched. And Jade knew, with a certainty she couldn't justify. The lines weren't just being seen, they were seeing back. Jade did not go home after Highway 99. She took back roads, like she could outrun the feeling that the lines had noticed her noticing them. At a stop sign, her phone buzzed from a number with no history. Don't stand under it. Don't look for the source. They log attention. She typed, "Who is this?" and hit send. The message vanished from the thread as if she never wrote it. Another ping followed. If you go back, go analog. No cloud, no live, no GPS. Back at the ranch office, she pulled up irrigation data and soil temps, trying to force the night into something measurable. Most of it looked normal, except one sensor map that showed a razor-straight discontinuity across 3 zones, like the orchard had been cut by an invisible ruler. One side was colder, not just at the trees, but in the air above them. She grabbed old-school gear from the office drawer in her truck, an AM radio, a compass, a cheap analog watch, a disposable film camera, and a notepad. She turned her phone off anyway and drove back to North 40. The orchard was too quiet, not peaceful, sterile. The AM radio caught a repeating tone under the static, slow and heavy, like it was vibrating inside her ribs. The compass needle twitched, then tugged toward the deeper rows. Halfway in, she crossed an invisible threshold. One step was normal night air. The next step felt thinner, pressured, electrically wrong. Then the blue line appeared again above the treetops, 6 inches wide, perfectly straight. It did not glow like a lamp. It looked like the air itself had been colored. Her flashlight did nothing to it. She raised the disposable camera and clicked. The moment did not feel captured. It felt refused. She clicked again, just to prove to herself she could. The line did the impossible. It relocated without moving. One blink, it spanned one gap. Next blink, it spanned a different gap yards away. No slide, no sweep. Just a new placement, like the scene had been edited between frames. Her truck was behind her, her phone was off. It vibrated anyway. She ran back, yanked it from the glove box, and the screen was already awake. No lock screen, no passcode. A single command sat there. Marker 23, County Road 168. Now, come alone. At marker 23, the air felt heavy, storm-like without wind. Her headlights washed over an empty field, and yet her brain kept insisting there was mass out there that light refused to define. Then her eyes adjusted. A compact object sat low in the field, warping the air around it. Not huge, not cinematic, deliberate. Parked like it did not fear discovery. Beside it stood a tall silhouette, narrow torso, long limbs, head shape wrong in a way her mind could not label. It did not sway, it did not fidget, it simply waited. Her phone brightened. Text appeared as if placed there. You are early in the change. Then meaning arrived inside her head, not words. Not threat, not warning. Assessment. A flash of an image hit her, the Central Valley from above, crisscrossed by pale blue lines, a grid laid over human space like measuring tape over skin. She understood the point with sick clarity. Attention was the signal. Her phone showed one more line. Don't try to keep proof. Keep yourself. The silhouette stepped forward once. No footfall, no crunch of dirt, just a shift, like a cursor moving on a screen. Her analog watch made a single loud click. The world dimmed for a breath. Headlights, stars, the edge of the field, like someone lowered the exposure on reality. Then the night returned. The object was gone. The silhouette was gone. Marker 23 was just marker 23. The wind came back in a soft gust that felt almost staged. Jade sat in her truck shaking, staring at her hands to convince herself they were still her own. On the passenger seat, the disposable camera lay exactly where she had dropped it. The film counter had advanced by 3 frames. Jade remembered taking one shot. Jade won't describe what happened between 3 and 3:17 a.m. Not because she's hiding it, because the memory won't stay sharp. But one thing is clear. Those blue lines didn't act like random lights. They acted like a grid. And a grid isn't there to scare you, it's there to measure. 3 weeks later, Reagan starts forgetting details. Jade doesn't. Her last note is simple. They didn't erase the story. They chose who could still remember it. And then, she goes quiet. If you saw the line tonight, would you record it, run, or go back? Comment. Record, run, return. What kind of light can melt a perfect circle in snow without registering as heat, shut down a diesel tanker's entire electrical system except the headlights, and then carve symbols into glass that never fade even after the ice is gone? And if those same symbols later appear pulsing inside an oil pipeline like coded coordinates, who exactly is trying to communicate through the storm? 3 weeks after the Dalton Road incident, Gideon Merrick walked the pipeline corridor with a thermal camera and a checklist mindset, expecting nothing but cold gradients and ordinary faults. Yet he carried a single detail from a driver's report that would not leave him alone. An orange light that did not behave like fire and symbols that survived ice. The corridor around him felt too quiet for open Alaska, and his CB scan picked up short rhythmic bursts that sounded less like interference and more like something testing the channel. Gideon's thermal display found the first anomaly before his eyes did. A clean orange point hovering about 3 feet above the snow, perfectly defined and unaffected by wind-driven flakes, and directly beneath it, the snow had melted into a flawless circle, yet the thermal readout showed no heat source at all. He moved closer and watched the circle widen by a few inches in a smooth, perfect ring, as if the snow was following an instruction rather than melting, and his headset filled with a low tone that he felt in his teeth and ribs more than he heard. More orange points appeared in mirrored pairs along the right-of-way, spaced with deliberate regularity. Then 6 lights assembled into a pentagon above the pipeline and began rotating with slow certainty, and the low tone deepened into a pressure that made Gideon's stomach tighten. He raised the camera and saw the points brighten in sequence like a scan. Then the lights lowered until they hovered just above the steel, and the impossible part was how the steel reacted. Because the orange did not flare or burn, it seeped, sliding into the metal surface as if the pipeline had become permeable. As the orange sank into the line, dim pulses ignited along the pipe in a repeating cadence, a chain of faint orange nodes blinking like a message traveling through steel, and Gideon realized he was not watching a phenomenon. He was watching a process. He scraped a small metal sample from a site where the glow had concentrated, and the fragment felt warmer than it should in that cold. Then the pulses marched onward in groups, pausing, repeating, then shifting, like a code that expected to be read. That was when Gideon contacted Jude Rasson, the diesel driver whose report had started circulating through the corridor crews, and Jude agreed to meet only because the symbols were still etched into his windshield, still visible at certain angles as if the glass had been engraved by frost itself. Jude described a whiteout night at -32°C when orange lights formed a corridor along the road. His engine died while his headlights stayed bright, and a tall, thin figure stepped out of an orange door and wrote numbers into instant fractal ice on his windshield with a hand that had too many finger lengths. And Jude's timeline did not add up afterward, 4 hours missing on a stretch that should have taken 90 minutes. Gideon did not need to believe every detail to recognize the pattern, because Jude's etched symbols matched the grouping rhythm of the pulses Gideon had just filmed. As if the corridor had written the same language on glass first, then upgraded to steel. Gideon brought his thermal stills and the scraped metal sample to Jude Rasson, and one look at Jude's etched windshield was enough, because the clusters matched the pipeline pulse cadence in the same pauses and repeats. They drove to a safe pullout near the corridor to test whether the lights reacted to attention, and the moment they stopped, Gideon's thermal display found clean orange points hovering 3 feet above snow with perfect edges, unaffected by wind. Then more points appeared in mirrored pairs like posts placed on a ruler, and the air inside the cab felt pressurized without sound, the kind of silence that makes teeth ache. When Gideon raised the camera, one point drifted sideways to stay aligned with the cab as if locking on, and Jude's etched symbols caught the headlights and looked briefly deeper, as if the grooves were filling with faint orange from inside the glass. Then a thin, fractal edge of frost formed along the lines even though the cabin heat was running, and Gideon realized the corridor could rewrite water and light on demand. The pipeline in Gideon's thermal view began to answer, dim pulses igniting along the steel in the same grouped cadence, traveling in runs, pausing, repeating, then shifting as if correcting itself. And when Gideon held the metal sample near the window, the fragment warmed in his glove, and the camera showed a faint orange response inside it, like the corridor could address the material directly even after removal. The dash lights dipped in the same beat as the pulses and the orange points outside, and the CB channel opened by itself, carrying a thin layered cadence under the hum, not words, a measured counting that returned Gideon's own breathing a fraction of a second late, as if the radio had become a mirror. Then the nearest orange point brightened, and the snow beyond it stopped swirling for a heartbeat, and a tall vertical absence appeared where the storm should have been, a narrow, darker shape that did not blur in wind-driven flakes. And as it moved closer without stepping, the cabin temperature dropped in a single clean notch. Jude turned toward the empty passenger seat as if someone had just sat down, and Gideon saw a second outline in the passenger window reflection, too tall and too thin to be either man, positioned exactly where an unseen observer would stand. Then the etched symbols on the windshield flared once in faint orange, and the fractal frost traced outward like a diagram being completed. Gideon tried to speak, and his voice died in his throat, while the CB cadence paused as if waiting for input, then resumed with a slightly different rhythm. and Jude's hand froze on the ignition when the engine coughed once and went silent, while the headlight stayed bright and steady like a held breath. Gideon kept filming with shaking hands until the thermal screen bloomed white, not overexposure, but a clean blank field. And in that blank, Jude's silhouette and Gideon's silhouette appeared twice, offset by inches, as if the cab had two versions of the same moment layered together. Then the orange points outside collapsed inward, like they were being pulled into a single coordinate. After that, the record breaks, because Gideon's camera file ends mid-frame. Jude's dash clock later shows a jump that neither of them can explain, and the only new thing left behind is a fresh thin line etched into the glass beside the old symbols, a line that looks like a direction, and a final CB burst that repeats 3 beats, then silence. If the orange lights can melt perfect circles without heat and write persistent symbols into both glass and steel, then they are manipulating matter through rules that do not require fire, and if their code points to weak spots in the pipeline, then the entities may be caretakers trying to prevent a disaster. Or they may be rehearsing control by practicing on infrastructure first before they practice on people. Gideon keeps walking the corridor with a camera and a growing dread that the next message will not be about the pipeline at all. Are the entities protecting the wilderness or protecting their own route through it? Tell me what you think happened down there, and if you want the next case, please hit like and subscribe. At 1:15, a UFO hovered over the north fence. An alien silhouette crossed the warehouse roof in orange light. All 16 cameras went blank as the hum filled the yard. David had guarded government sites for 19 years. He held high clearance and signed too many NDAs. He worked a lone night shift north of Tonopah. The facility stored prototypes and sealed aerospace hardware. He knew questions earned punishment, not answers. Then the protocols started, before he understood why. At 1:15, camera 7 turned blank without warning. The other feeds followed, one by one, then all at once. Every monitor showed empty black, yet status stayed green. David refreshed the system twice and got the same nothing. A low hum started inside the walls, then underfoot. The air felt heavier, like the room was pressurized. He stepped outside into cold desert air and fine dust. Camera 7 was intact, but aimed straight down. Its mount was tight, like someone adjusted it carefully. Yard floodlights flickered, then shifted into dull orange. Beyond the north fence, a dark oval hovered against stars. 2 smaller lights flanked it, perfectly even. Another light blinked once, then duplicated into 3. The 3 lights formed a shallow arc and held position. They slid sideways without any travel path. A second arc appeared farther east, mirroring the first. David heard no engines, only the hum, steady and deep. The fence wires trembled once, then went perfectly still. His flashlight died in 1 beat, battery reading full. His phone shut off at 80%, then stayed dead. Orange light rolled across metal walls like heat without warmth. On the warehouse roof, an alien silhouette crossed fast and precise. A second alien shape followed, taller, thinner, angular. They moved like joints were hinges, not muscle. One paused at the roof edge and looked down. Another stood beside it, then vanished between frames. Above the roofline, the dark oval lowered a few feet and held steady over the fence. Smaller UFO lights rotated around it in a clean ring and pulsed in a 3-beat pattern. The hum matched those beats, like coded breathing. A low sphere drifted over the yard near the floodlights and cast no shadow. It passed a camera pole, and the pole went dark. Another sphere mirrored it on the far side, keeping perfect spacing. Then the roofline flashed with a thin blue seam. For a second, more aliens stood there in a row, heads turning together toward the yard gate. The seam closed and the roof looked empty again. The orange lights stayed on, waiting. David rushed back inside and shut the office door. The monitors stayed black, yet every status icon stayed green. He opened the event log and saw no faults. The timestamps jumped, then corrected themselves. The hum pressed harder, like a second heartbeat. He grabbed the landline and called command 40 miles south. A calm voice answered on the first ring. It asked for his unit code, not his name. David reported the orange lights and the blank feeds. The voice did not ask for repeats. It said a sweep team was already moving. It told him to keep logging everything. It warned him not to chase anything outside. David returned to the yard and kept moving slowly. He watched the roof through window reflections and metal panels. In reflection, two aliens stood at the roof edge. A third alien appeared between them, then flickered out, their limbs bent at sharp angles like jointed tools. A low sphere drifted along the fence and stopped. Another sphere mirrored it, keeping perfect distance. Each sphere pulsed once, and a camera pole died. The dark oval UFO above the fence stayed perfectly centered. Smaller lights rotated around it in a tight ring. The ring tightened, then loosened, like a breathing machine. The hum matched that motion and filled his ribs. The orange floodlights blinked in 3-beat patterns. One alien raised a hand and held a precise sign. The ring lights answered with the same 3-beat pulse. David felt his thoughts slow, then snap back. He kept his eyes on reflections and kept walking. The warehouse roof became a stage of orange light. A tall alien silhouette stood at the edge, rigid. Its body looked built from angles, not muscle. Limbs hung too long, joints narrow and sharply defined. Another alien appeared beside it without any approach. It simply occupied the space, then shifted aside. Their heads turned together, matching timing like a metronome. The roofline flashed with a thin blue seam. For one blink, more aliens stood inside that seam. They lined up like figures in a doorway. The seam closed, and they vanished again. Above the north fence, a dark oval UFO lowered and stopped. It held position with absolute steadiness, ignoring wind and gravity. Smaller lights rotated around it in a perfect ring. The ring tightened, then loosened like controlled breathing. Each light pulsed in a 3-beat pattern. A second oval appeared farther east, smaller but identical. Its ring formed instantly, matching the first ring rhythm. The two rings synced, then drifted sideways together. They shifted without any visible travel path. A third light blinked above them, then split into 6. Those 6 formed a clean hex around the first oval. Low spheres moved through the yard at shoulder height. They crossed floodlights, and the glow deepened orange. They passed camera poles, and each pole went dark. The spheres never cast shadows on gravel or steel. They stopped at measured points along the perimeter. Each stop mirrored another stop across the yard. The hum thickened and added faint clicking beneath it. The clicking sounded like counting, steady and patient. Thin beams flickered down, then vanished before touching ground. Where beams aimed, the gravel looked briefly wet and glassy. The tall alien crouched at the roof edge and dropped. It fell without sound, as if gravity was muted. It met the ground with no dust, no impact, no rebound. It moved into darkness, then appeared closer by position change. A thinner alien crossed behind it, fast and precise. The two separated and rejoined as if following a grid. One raised a long hand and folded fingers into a sign. The ring lights answered with the same pattern in pulses. A nearby sphere drifted toward the office windows and stopped. It held perfectly still, like it was listening. A blue seam opened again along the roofline and stayed open. Inside it, silhouettes looked layered, like stacked depth. Aliens stood at different distances, yet aligned in one row. The seam brightened, and the hum shifted pitch. For a moment, the two oval UFOs aligned nose to nose. Then they separated without motion or sound. Their rings rotated opposite directions, then stopped in sync. A faint geometric lattice appeared between the ovals. The lattice pulsed once, then folded inward and vanished. Then every sphere pulsed at the same instant. The ring lights flashed in a clean sequence, left to right. The roof seam closed like a cut stitched shut. Aliens on the ground blurred, then snapped into new positions. The two ovals rose together and drifted beyond the fence. Smaller lights followed in tight formation, never breaking spacing. The orange glow faded back toward harsh white. The hum lingered thin and patient, as if it stayed nearby. David stayed on shift, but something in him broke. He kept hearing the hum inside quiet rooms. Orange light followed him behind closed eyelids. He stopped trusting screens, then stopped trusting silence. Each blank camera frame felt like a warning. He checked corners twice, then checked them again. Sleep came in fragments, always ending at 1:15. He woke tasting metal, with static in his ears. 3 weeks later, he requested a transfer without explanation. He never spoke about Tanopa to anyone at work. He only wrote one line in his private notebook. They can erase feeds, but they cannot erase memory. So what did the UFOs want from that facility? Drop your theory below, then like and subscribe. October 14th. Grant finds a dark blue Ford F-250. It sits alone on a rocky ledge. The driver door hangs wide open. The key is still in the ignition. The radio hisses with white noise. A calm male voice repeats one warning: do not look up at the sky. The ranch sits east of Laramie, about 30 miles out. Grant Avery runs a small spread there. He is checking fence lines that afternoon. A wildlife biologist walks with him. They spot the truck from far away. It is parked with careful precision. Yet the location makes no sense. The nose points due north. There is no road, there is no trail. Only brushland runs to the horizon. Grant climbs up the rock. He studies the dashboard. The headlight switch is set to on. He follows the angle of the beams. At night, the lights would aim skyward. They would point toward a distant ridge. One outcrop looks like a broken tooth. Grant calls the sheriff office. Deputies arrive before sunset, then another unit joins them. They photograph the Ford and the ledge. They tag the tire tracks below. They scan the brush with lights kept low. No prints lead to the door. No trail leads away. A deputy leans into the cab without sitting down. The key is still in the ignition. The seat is clean. The floor mat has no new grit. The radio never settles. The calm voice repeats the same sentence, steady and patient. They decide to hold the scene through the night. 2 units park below the rock with engines off. They watch the open door in a handheld scope, then switch to thermal. The cab stays cold and empty. Near midnight, the static changes cadence. The pauses between repeats stretch longer. Everyone feels pressure in their ears, like a storm building. A faint hum rises from the ground and fades. Around 3:17, the Ford headlights flicker once, as if they breathe. Nobody touches the switch. The open door does not move, yet the beams tremble in place. At dawn, Grant climbs back up with the deputies. The inside of the windshield is suddenly covered in dense writing. Every line says the same thing: do not look up at the sky. The marks look fresh, with uneven strokes and crowded lines. A deputy tries to rub one word with a glove. It does not smear. It feels set into the glass. Someone tries to take photos. One phone camera freezes on a black screen. Another captures a single frame of pale light and then crashes. Nobody says what they think it resembles. More people arrive as word spreads. By late afternoon, one volunteer does not return from the brush. His radio clicks once, then plays the warning on a loop. They find boot prints that end in bare dirt with no next step. Night brings more vehicles. A second truck appears along a dry wash. A sedan turns up on a dirt turnout. An ATV sits by a fence gate. Each one matches the pattern. Door open, key in place, radio warning, headlights aimed upward. Grant becomes a staging point. Deputies, volunteers, and neighbors rotate through his ranch. They tape windows, aim lights at the ground, and repeat the rule out loud. Eyes down, then people begin to vanish. A deputy walks behind a barn and never returns. A volunteer reaches into a cab to shut off a radio and is simply gone. The door stays open. The key stays in place. On the third night, power cuts out across the ranch. Phones glitch. Floodlights die. A truck rolls into the yard without an engine sound. Its headlights snap on and rake the roofline. A porch voice calls Grant's name in a missing deputy voice and repeats the warning. Panic breaks the group. One volunteer lifts his head for direction, then freezes, then steps forward into nothing. A ranch hand grabs him and vanishes too. Grant runs to the horse barn with his chin tucked. Heavy steps move above the loft, too deep for boots. A voice outside imitates the wildlife biologist, begging him to open the door while repeating the warning in perfect rhythm. The voice laughs in stacked tones. Grant climbs into the root cellar and pulls the hatch shut. Above him, the heavy steps pause over the boards as the warning shifts from the yard into his skull. Morning arrives with brittle light. The power returns without a reset. Grant climbs out of the root cellar. The ranch is wrong in a quiet way. Vehicles that filled the yard are gone. Footprints that should crisscross the dirt are missing. Even the barn dust looks undisturbed. Grant drives to the sheriff office. The building is open but half lit. Fewer deputies remain than there should be. They confirm what Grant already senses. More people are missing. Some vanished near vehicles. Some vanished inside their own homes. In several places, a radio was found playing the warning on a loop. Search teams return to the ledge. The Ford is there again, exactly placed. The writing still coats the windshield. The letters look deeper now, more like an etch than ink. They find the missing truck owner inside his own vehicle miles away. Causes cardiac arrest. His eyes are open and fixed upward. The wildlife biologist is still missing. Her phone logs show offline for days. Yet Grant remembers her voice at night, close and clear. A quiet visitor arrives in a plain vehicle with government plates. No full name, no badges shown long. He speaks with the sheriff office in a closed room, then asks to speak to Grant alone. He shows a file worn at the corners. Cases across decades, different counties, same pattern. Doors open, keys in place, radios warning, headlights aimed upward. He speaks about observation. He uses careful language. The entities exist in a quantum state. They become more real when observed. Attention collapses them into solidity. Observation is fuel. Vehicles act as conduits. Radios pull ears. Headlights pull eyes. The beam into the sky forces a choice. Grant asks what happens when someone looks. The visitor says geometry loosens. Time slips. The sky becomes a doorway that only opens when watched. Grant thinks of his ceiling seam bending. He thinks of the volunteer who took one step and then no second step. The visitor warns Grant to reduce observation. Curtains closed, no mirrors facing windows, no porch lights, no reflective metal left outside. Grant returns home before dusk. The ranch feels too exposed. The horizon line feels too sharp. That night, the hum begins earlier. It rises from the north, from the direction of the Broken Tooth Ridge. Grant stays inside with every curtain drawn. He sits on the floor away from windows. He keeps his gaze on the wood planks. Then the radio turns on by itself. The voice is not calm anymore. It is softer, closer, intimate. Grant does not own that radio. The warning repeats, but now it sounds like an invitation. Do not look up at the sky. Something knocks once on the roof. Not a branch, not hail. A single heavy touch as if testing. The ceiling seam above Grant bends again, deeper this time. The boards do not creak. They simply shift, as if the room is being remeasured. Grant crawls toward the hallway, eyes down, hand feeling the floor. The hum thickens until it feels like pressure on his teeth. A line of light appears under the front door, too bright, too clean. It widens as if the door is opening. Grant keeps his eyes on the baseboard. He speaks to himself to stay anchored. Then his shadow moves the wrong way. It stretches upward along the wall, climbing toward the ceiling while Grant stays low. The last thing Grant hears is his own voice from the porch, perfectly imitated, repeating the warning with calm patience. Do not look up at the sky. After that night, the ranch sits dark and silent. The curtains are either all shut tight or all pulled open, depending on who you ask. Some say Grant left without a trace. Some say he is still inside, sitting on the floor with his eyes down. Nobody is willing to stand in the yard long enough to find out. What do you think happened to Grant? Comment your theory, then like and subscribe for the next report. Why did Highway 83 go silent at 11:47 p.m.? Why did an amber light keep pace with Miles no matter how fast he drove? And why did the stars disappear one by one while he watched? Miles was a deputy sheriff on Highway 83. It was Valentine night, February 14, 2019. He patrolled alone in the Texas desert. Traffic was rare and the shrubs stood still. At 11:47 p.m., the wind suddenly died. The silence felt heavy, like air before a storm. Miles slowed and scanned the road ahead. An amber light hovered over the highway in front of him. It was low and steady, hanging above the center line. It looked close enough to be a flare, yet too clean to be fire. Curiosity pulled him forward. Miles drove toward the amber light. He told himself he would stop short and look. He wanted to know what kind of aircraft could hover that low. As he closed the distance, the failures began in sequence. First, the radio hissed and went dead. Then his phone lost service. Then the dash display dimmed as if someone lowered a switch. The engine sound softened next, not sputtering, not choking, just fading. The tires made no noise on the asphalt. Even his own breathing sounded far away. Miles glanced up for a reference point. The stars were disappearing, not flickering, not covered by cloud. One star would simply be gone. Then another. Then a whole patch of sky erased clean. He kept driving, slower now. The amber light stayed ahead, perfectly still. No wobble, no drift, no pulse. It waited. When he was still a short distance away, the light vanished. Instant. No streak, no rise, no fall, just gone. Miles hit the brake. The pedal felt normal. The car slowed. Silence stayed absolute. Then his rearview mirror filled with amber. The light had reappeared behind him, low over the road, centered, close. Fear finally beat curiosity. Miles spun the wheel and accelerated. The cruiser surged forward. The amber light chased him. No matter how hard he pushed the gas, it gained. It matched every speed change like it was tied to his bumper. Miles watched the sky again. More stars vanished as he drove. The darkness above turned blank and flat. He looked back and saw shapes inside the amber glow. Soft outlines, like figures behind frosted glass. His stomach dropped. A voice spoke inside his head. One word: stop. Miles fought the urge to obey. He clenched the wheel until his hands hurt. The amber light closed the last distance. The windshield filled with cold brightness. The world flashed white without sound. Miles came back with a violent gasp. The dash clock read 3:22 a.m. His wristwatch still read 11:53 p.m. The missing hours hit him before the fear did. He lifted his head and saw emptiness where the highway should be. Packed dirt, flat dark distance, no lights, no signs. He tried to stay in the seat, then the driver door clicked, the lock released by itself. The door swung open, slow and controlled. Miles shoved against it with his boot. It kept opening anyway. Amber light returned behind him, low to the ground, steady. It painted the dirt with color that did not belong to night. Miles stepped out, breath ragged. The air felt thick, sound felt stolen. The amber glow held a few yards away. It did not rush, it waited. A tall shape resolved inside it. At first it was only a darker seam in the amber, then limbs separated from the glow. Long arms, long legs, a torso too narrow. Its head was slightly too large and elongated. Smooth pale skin caught the light with a matte wet sheen. Large black almond eyes faced him without blinking. Tiny nose slits. A thin mouth that did not move. Long fingers hung at its sides. The joints looked narrow, almost hinged. It did not sway like a person. It stayed perfectly balanced, as if gravity was optional. Alien. Miles tried to raise his weapon. His arm moved late and heavy. He tried to shout. Only a thin rasp came out. The alien glided one slow step closer. No footsteps, no dust, just approach. A voice spoke inside his skull. Stop. Miles backed into the open cruiser door, shaking. The amber light brightened. The pressure behind his eyes tightened. The alien lifted one hand, a small motion that felt like a switch. Miles bolted, away from the amber, away from the eyes. His boots hit dirt that felt too soft, then too hard. Each stride landed wrong. His body lagged behind his decision. Like the air was thickening around him, Miles looked back. The alien had not sprinted. It had simply moved. One glide, then another, and it was already close. Panic turned into pure animal math. There is no distance, there is no speed, it decides where you are. Miles changed direction. The horizon offered no cover, no lights, no fence, only flat, dark land. He felt trapped in open space. The amber light stayed behind him like a sun at ground level, steady, unblinking. Then the alien was beside him. No impact, no footfall, just presence, a shadow that did not match any angle. Miles jerked his arm up to shield his face. He tried to shout, only a thin rasp. The alien reached for his wrist, long fingers, narrow joints. The movement was slow, almost gentle. That made it worse. Its hand touched him. The contact was not warm, not cold. It felt like pressure without texture, like a glove made of static. Miles felt his skin prickle, then go numb. The fingers slid around his wrist, not gripping yet, encircling, testing. Miles yanked back. His arm moved inches and stopped. His muscles fired and did not translate into motion. He felt his breath catch and his lungs refuse for one beat. The alien tightened the circle. A clean squeeze, not crushing, not injuring, just absolute control. Miles felt his pulse jump into his throat. He tasted metal. He could see his own trembling reflected in the alien's black eyes. Nothing reflected back, no fear, no anger, only depth. A voice pressed into his skull, not spoken, felt. Stop. Miles tried to fight the command. His legs quivered, his shoulders spasmed. His mind screamed, move. The alien's hand rotated slightly. The circle around his wrist became a lock. Miles felt his whole body obey that single point of contact, like his joints had been reassigned. Then the memories started, not remembered, displayed, pulled forward like files. A childhood bedroom, a porch light, a first badge, a traffic stop on a quiet road, a Valentine message on a phone screen, a face he had not let himself think about in years. Each image arrived with sensation, smell, temperature, the weight of regret, the sting of guilt, the heat of fear, all of it at once. Miles tried to clamp down. He tried to think of a blank wall. The wall filled with more scenes. His mind could not hide. He realized the alien was not reading his thoughts. It was turning pages in him, at speed, with perfect access. Miles shook harder, his knees buckled. He dropped to one knee in dirt. Pain should have helped, but even pain felt filtered. The alien held his wrist steady, the squeeze never changed. Calm, measured. "You are seen," the message arrived like a stamp, final, recorded. Miles made a sound that was half sob, half choke. He begged without words. He could not form a sentence, only a raw plea inside his skull. "Stop. Please, stop." The amber light brightened. The pressure behind his eyes tightened into a hard band. His lungs locked. His vision went white at the edges. The alien's fingers loosened. For a fraction of a second, Miles thought he was free. Then the world snapped to silence and white. Just before sunrise, Miles appeared on Highway 83. Not arriving, just there, as if dropped onto the shoulder. A driver found him shaking in fine dust. On his wrist was a clear circular bruise, like finger marks. Miles would not explain. He only whispered, "Alien. If you drove Highway 83 and the wind died, would you keep going?" Comment your choice below, then like and subscribe. Brian Miller slammed the brakes when a disc-shaped craft dropped out of the fog and hovered directly in his lane. Blue light flooded the windshield, and an alien stepped into the beam beside his hood, staring through the glass like it had been waiting for him. Brian had driven the Rotorua Road so many times he could picture it with his eyes closed. Then a sudden blue glare flashed, and the drive no longer felt continuous. Images intruded between blinks, the curve of a metallic surface above the road, light bending without a source, and a tall shape standing where no person should be. Each time Brian tried to focus on the memory, it slid away, leaving only the sense that something had been directly in front of him, watching, measuring. Headaches arrived like pressure behind Brian's eyes. His mouth kept going dry. Sometimes his hands trembled when he reached for a door handle, like a reflex that remembered a different kind of doorway. Then Brian found them. 2 pyrite crystals were wedged deep in his car's compartment he had never used. In the glove box, a notebook sat under old papers, thick with strange sketches and repeating symbols, lines drawn hard enough to tear the page fibers. Brian stared at the pages with a cold, sinking feeling, because the handwriting looked like his but the intention did not. He picked them up and suddenly shuddered. A gut feeling told him he was being watched. A car idled across the street longer than it should. When Brian stepped outside, the driver lowered a visor and did not look up. In a shop window reflection, Brian caught the same sedan easing behind him at a crawl. He walked faster. The sedan matched him. He turned down an alley. The sedan did not follow, but when he reached the next intersection, it was there again, parked like it had always been. Brian tried to make it home, but it seemed they still caught up with him. 2 men came to his door, polite, tidy, and calm in a way that did not belong in an ordinary conversation. They introduced themselves as researchers linked to national institutions and asked to see the crystals and the notebook. They didn't even need to ask. They knew exactly what he was holding. Brian refused. They left without arguing, but the air in the hallway felt different after their coats disappeared. That night, an eerie light glowed from Brian's window. It caught his attention at once, and he turned to look, deeply unsettled. Outside, a disc-shaped craft hung for a heartbeat, its underside lighting the fog like a blue ceiling. Brian's breath caught. He stepped closer, fingers hovering near the curtain edge, and the craft vanished in a clean upward motion, too fast for distance to explain. The silence after it left felt staged. Then a sound came from inside his apartment. Soft, close, wrong, a faint scrape like fabric dragging across a door frame. Brian turned away from the window and moved down the hallway, heartbeat loud in his ears. He pushed the closet door open. The hiding place was empty. The pyrite crystals were gone. The notebook was gone. The folded clothes were disturbed by careful hands, not ransacked. Nothing else had been touched. No valuables missing, no mess. Brian stood there with his hands half raised, staring into the gap where proof had been, realizing the distraction outside and the intrusion inside had moved like a single plan. Then pain split him open. It struck behind his eyes like a hammer, and he lurched backward, shoulders scraping the wall. His vision narrowed, the apartment tilted. He tried to breathe and could not find a steady rhythm. Something massive pushed through the pressure, and memory flooded in, not as a thought, but as a torrent. He was back on the highway. Fog swallowed the road, then a disc-shaped craft dropped out of it and hovered directly in his lane. Blue light poured over the hood and windshield, thick enough to feel like weight. Brian remembered gripping the steering wheel so hard his hands ached. Shapes moved inside the light. They stepped forward, a line of silent bodies surrounding the car. Then he was lifted, rising into the blue ring as the road fell away beneath him. Inside the craft, the same gray-skinned form stood close, watching him with those black eyes. But then the image shifted, and Brian understood the first deception. The gray figure was a shell. Behind that surface, the beings were proportioned like humans, with eyes that cast a multicolored gem-like glow. Their hair was long and thick, either dark and deep like a night sky, or bright and lustrous like sunlight. Their skin carried many tones, but it always looked smooth and warm, as if it held its own gentle heat. Brian remembered the second deception as clearly as a knife edge. The discs humans had reported for years were only coverings. Beneath the disguise were enormous fighter craft, vast machines with heavy weapon systems, missile arrays, and hard, angular lines that made the disc shape feel like a costume wrapped around a warship. Then they explained everything to him. Brian had been chosen because his perception could hold two incompatible realities at once without breaking. He could remember details under stress. He could receive complex meaning without twisting it into fantasy. He could carry information back through fear. The memory flood slowed. Brian slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, palms flat on the boards, breath shallow and uneven. The apartment around him returned, but it no longer felt like the same place. He understood why the evidence had been taken. If he accepted the truth, he would have to live with it. If he rejected it, the truth would still exist, and he would be the one left in the dark. Brian raised his head toward the window as if the sky might answer. The question was no longer what happened to him. The question was what he would do with what he now remembered. Brian pushed himself off the floor and stumbled out of the apartment as if the walls had started closing in. He did not pack. He did not lock the door. He walked fast, then faster, breath scraping his throat, the city around him smeared by motion and fear. Memory kept arriving, not the sterile facts of a test, but history with weight. He saw ancient Egypt in flashes that felt older than imagination, humans and visitors working side by side, not as masters and servants, as partners. The pyramids were not only monuments, they were joint projects, built with knowledge of energy and geometry, structures meant to stabilize fields and protect life through cycles of catastrophe. Then a disaster tore the story apart. A meteor strike, a global trauma, forcing the visitors to leave to deal with consequences beyond Earth. The separation hardened into misunderstanding. Over time, friendship turned into distance, distance into suspicion. Brian felt decades compress into a single sensation, both sides losing the language of trust. The visitors had tried to rebuild the relationship for years, again and again, through signs, encounters, warnings, and quiet contact. It never held. Humans reacted with fear. Humans turned the unknown into weapons and myths. Now the urgency had a cause. A hostile faction had entered the conflict, an alien group intent on sabotage, using fear and confusion as tools. Brian understood with a cold clarity that the break into his apartment was not random containment. It was theft with purpose. The crystals in the notebook had carried a secret, a key idea that could weaken the friendly faction's position. Taking them was not just erasing evidence, it was removing leverage. Brian looked up as he ran, as if his eyes could force the sky to confess. He reached an open stretch of road and stopped without meaning to. Above him, clouds split with unnatural light. Massive craft moved in formation, far larger than the disc shapes people whispered about, and their silhouettes looked like war machines. Then the sky erupted. Beams of light cut across the air. Distant flashes bloomed and vanished. Silent impacts lit the cloud base in pulses. Brian watched multiple gigantic ships trade fire overhead, and the scale of it made his knees go weak. He backed into the middle of the road, staring upward, mouth open, unable to decide whether to run or pray, while the battle continued above the city like a verdict. People later found Brian lying unconscious in the road, lips moving with the same phrase over and over. They could only make out the words, "We lost." If you were Brian, would you tell the world anyway? Comment yes or no below, then like and subscribe. James finished a deep field run and watched the photon map resolve into a built structure the size of star systems. Before he could save it, a tall humanoid figure stepped into the edge of his workspace, its body made of hard, faceted crystal plates that caught the dim light in sharp, prismatic shards. It stood perfectly still, angular and silent, a crown-like ridge rising from its head, its eyes glowing from within like cut gemstones, and James understood the discovery had come with a witness. James Webb was a senior astronomer trusted with deep field analysis, the kind of work that usually delivered silence and patience as its only rewards. He worked alone with humming servers, scanning a routine field for subtle asymmetries in ancient photons. What he found did not behave like nature. He saved private copies, tightened access logs, and began preparing for the moment someone tried to take the discovery away. With every refinement, the structure grew clearer. It was not a galaxy, not debris, not lensing. It was architecture. Towers rose higher than planetary orbits. Bridges spanned distances that made interstellar space feel small. Vast window-like openings framed entire star systems as if they were decorations. James began sketching compulsively, drawing lines he had never learned, drafting curves that felt familiar in his hands. Sleep stopped working. When he closed his eyes, he walked through cathedral-scale halls where statues of unknown beings stood frozen. They had tall humanoid silhouettes formed from hard-faceted crystal plates, with sharp angular shoulders and forearms like cut prisms. A crown-like ridge rose from each head in jagged crystalline fins, and their faces were minimal and stern, defined more by planes than flesh. Their eyes looked like gem cores, glowing from within as if light had been trapped inside and could not escape. Long hands ended in pointed crystal fingers held close to the body, perfectly still, as if waiting for a command. Every statue's head was angled, as if listening. Walls in his visions were covered in murals, showing the rise and collapse of countless civilizations across spans too long for a human mind to hold. He noticed something worse. Symbols on the distant structure matched fragments of geometry found in ancient Earth sites, Stonehenge, the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe. Not as copies, but as echoes, as if humanity had been given partial instructions through dreams. When he tried to explain that link, the room went quiet. His supervisor reviewed the logs, saw the private copies, saw the obsessive redraws, and suspended him for instability and protocol violations. Charts and math could not compete with how exhausted he looked. James walked out carrying one certainty. The discovery was real, and someone wanted it to stay unspoken. With nowhere left inside the official system, James searched for the only person who might understand. A former colleague who had vanished years earlier and no longer existed on official lists. He found the colleague living under quiet routines and borrowed names. The colleague did not look surprised. James was told he was not the first to find the structure, and no one found it by accident. The signal had been reaching certain minds for years, selecting for obsession, selecting for translation. The builders were described as gardeners, architects of civilizations who planted minds like seeds and waited for them to grow. If the structure was visible now, it meant the threshold had been reached. The harvest. As James left that meeting, the world began to echo the warning. Tides pulled back unnaturally far, revealing colossal black stone formations on the seafloor that vanished the moment people turned away. Constellations thinned. Entire star clusters disappeared from the night sky in clean patterns, as if an unseen hand were rearranging the universe like decor. A low vibration settled into the air across continents, not loud enough to hear, but heavy enough to feel inside the skull. People drifted through their days as if half asleep. Dreaming became shared territory. James began speaking in half-formed phrases he did not recognize. His notes filled with a new script, alien and fluent, as if his mind had been granted an alphabet that did not belong to humans. Then the distant structure reacted. At its center, space began to distort, as if reality itself were being unlatched. For the first time, James saw vast shadow forms at the rim of the opening, larger than planets, present in a way that made his skin crawl. Across the globe, technology faltered in synchronized pulses, like a test run for a shutdown. The gateway was starting to open. James returned to the observatory and pushed every instrument beyond safe limits. At first he felt the rush of certainty, the relief of finally proving he was not imagining it. Then the certainty turned cold. The data confirmed what he feared. The structure had been there since the earliest era of the universe, built into ancient light itself like a permanent scar. The subtle photon asymmetry he first noticed was not noise. It was a deliberate signature. James tried to breathe slowly, but every breath felt shallow. The more the structure resolved, the smaller his own mind felt, like it was being asked to hold an ocean in a cup. As the gateway widened, colossal ghost-like shapes drifted at its edges, larger than Jupiter, too vast to have faces, yet undeniably intelligent. The opening bent reality like a lens that had decided to reshape what it observed. Fear rose in him in stages. First, the fear of being watched. Then, the fear of being measured. Then, the fear of being judged ready. Across the planet, technology failed with surgical precision. Power grids, satellites, navigation, communications, not random collapse, control. James felt his hands shake as he switched to an optical scope, desperate for one reference point that could not be rewritten by software. And he saw the truth. Earth was not floating free. It sat inside a colossal black stone eye, a bowl-shaped socket that held the planet steady. Earth occupied the position of a pupil. The sight made him nauseous. It was not awe, it was humiliation. Humanity was not a traveler in space. Humanity was a specimen. James stared until his eyes burned, and the more he understood, the more his fear sharpened into something helpless. His mind kept reaching for an escape clause, a mistake, a comforting alternative. There was none. Then observation shifted into intervention. Across cities, architecture began to change. Streets and buildings straightened, angles expanded, and structures stretched toward proportions that did not belong to human scale, as if the planet were being refit for something far larger. The night sky rewrote itself into a living manuscript of light, telling a history millions of years long across the entire horizon. James remembered the echoes in Earth's oldest monuments and realized those were not coincidences. They were early contact through dreams, through inherited memory, through fragments planted in the mind long before anyone could name the source. He tried to write faster. His pen moved, but the words felt pointless. What did a human note matter to something that edited constellations? The telescope was never only for looking outward. It was a test. a signal that humanity had reached the threshold the gardeners had been waiting for. James wrote the final classification with fingers that no longer felt like they belonged to him. Humanity, species 7,047,093,156. Adopted. The word should have sounded like safety. It sounded like ownership. Earth became a single note inside a cosmic symphony of awareness. The era of being watched ended. The era of participation began. James looked at the instruments, at the sky, at his own shaking hands. For the first time in his life, he could not imagine any action that mattered. He stopped fighting the thought. He went still. James stayed still at the console, breathing shallow, eyes fixed on the rewritten sky. He did not feel brave or chosen. He felt processed. If you think you know what the gardeners are harvesting, drop your theory below. Like and subscribe for the next episode. The Antarctic night was a compression of swirling snow and wind. Dr. Elias Vance worked outside the outpost Gamma habitat, lowering a deep penetration sonar scanner onto a patch of ancient ice. The data returned an impossible signature. His internal log recorded the findings. Log entry 58, subject subglacial anomaly. The readings defy conventional understanding. The size is astronomical, 5 kilometers beneath the ice sheet, and the profile is unnerving. A vast, perfectly circular metallic structure. This is deliberate, non-terrestrial engineering. It does not belong to the ice, the rock, or the history of mankind. The magnitude of the discovery was a cold certainty, an artifact of unimaginable provenance. Vance prepared to retract the scanner, but the environment suddenly fractured. The wind died instantly, replaced by a vacuum of silence. Looking up, the sky, stripped of the aurora, held a single, potent, yellow-white light. It hung motionless. The electronic world immediately collapsed. His compass spun wildly, settling on the ground. His radio went dead after static, and his chronograph flashed random time zones. My brain registered a categorical event breach. This was not a geomagnetic anomaly. This was focused, intelligent interference. Vance felt the deep, biological tremor of the unknown, but his analytical self seized control. The light began a controlled descent, contracting into a tight, focused cone directly above the drill site. The ice beneath his boots began a low internal vibration, causing fine dust particles to rise and shimmer. Vance stopped his retreat. Retreat guarantees nothing but the loss of data. Survival is secondary to documentation. He made a conscious choice. He activated his hardened field camera and audio recorder, directing them toward the mesmerizing light source. The light swelled, changing from focused yellow to a consuming, absolute white. The humming beneath his feet escalated, pressing against his chest. He managed a final, blinding glance upward as the light consumed his vision. The overwhelming intensity rendered the scene void, erasing the boundary between ice and observer. The camera's final frame recorded only the silent, white ignition of his abduction. This was the unavoidable pivot, the moment science was abandoned for the reality of the impossible. Elias Vance was jolted from the void by profound, unnatural cold. His eyes snapped open. He was naked, weightless, suspended in a thick, perfectly clear liquid that coated his skin. The sound of his own breathing was a hollow, frantic gurgle. He was sealed within a massive, flawless cylindrical tube, a monumental test tube of seamless crystalline material. Panic asserted itself. He thrashed, slamming his forearm against the curved wall, generating only weak ripples in the fluid. I am sealed. I am submerged. The material is impossible to breach. The terror was amplified by the silence. The environment outside the liquid was noiseless, yet overwhelmingly present. He forced his vision past the liquid surface. The interior of the vessel was a vast spherical space, sheathed in a matte, silver-white metal, a clinical architecture of absolute curved sterility. Through the translucent wall, he saw them, the Watchers, shadowy figures, unnaturally slender with large, domed craniums. He could only discern the absolute, reflective blackness of their colossal eyes, regarding his plight with impassive scrutiny. He was the sample. Fine, metallic filaments, thinner than hair, extended through the tube wall, adhering precisely to his nerve clusters, his temples, neck, and wrists. They glowed faintly, transmitting data. On a nearby panel, the data was rendered not in human characters, but in a stream of flowing geometric symbols depicting his state. heartbeat, respiration, and the rapid, complex flux of his neural activity. Every signal is quantified. My suffering is merely data. A sophisticated, segmented robotic arm extended from the ceiling, its motion frictionless. It carried a focused orange-red beam emitter, which swept the length of his body. The arm projected a chillingly detailed holographic rendering onto the observation wall, a three-dimensional map of his internal systems. His skeletal frame in cold blue, his organs in faint green, and the dense electrical network of his brain pulsed in violet, a real-time dissection presented without apology. As the arm retreated, Vance managed to twist slightly. He saw an adjacent tube, identical to his own. Suspended within that liquid was another figure, human-sized, completely motionless, skin ethereal, pale white. The realization was a crushing weight in the fluid. This is not a chaotic event. This is a recurring operation. I am not the first, nor am I likely to be the last. I am simply the newest entry in a systematic ledger of biological research. I am a data point in their immense ongoing program. The clinical precision of the facility was the true source of horror. The experiments intensified. The liquid around him darkened, turning a milky, aggressive yellow. Sensory overload became the means of measurement. A wave of searing heat caused involuntary muscular spasms, immediately followed by a profound, draining cold. The geometric symbols outside flashed wildly. He felt a deep, sharp, invasive pain at the back of his neck, the sensation of a foreign object being inserted or extracted. He thrashed, but the effort was futile, dissolving into weak bubbles. Through a distant, curved viewport, he saw a small, fragile blue marble, Earth. He was far beyond the atmosphere. There is no escape. I am entirely within their dominion, millions of miles from the safety of any known jurisdiction. The isolation was total. A new device descended directly above the crown of his stasis tube. It emitted a rhythmic, hypnotic light, timed perfectly to the violet energy output of his neural mapping. Vance felt a sudden, terrifying shift in his consciousness, a profound, existential detachment. His entire life, his memories, began to stream across his internal vision in a chaotic, reversed rush. They are not merely reading the information. They are cataloging, copying, and perhaps fundamentally altering the source code of my identity. His awareness began to dim. The tube's clinical light faded to a gray haze. The hum of the machinery ceased to register. He was overwhelmed by the conviction that his narrative was over, his consciousness about to be reduced to sterile data in an alien archive. My body is lost. My freedom is gone. Now, my entire history, my very sense of self, is being professionally, clinically erased. The light finally extinguished itself. In the aftermath of the blackout, total silence enveloped Vance. He existed in a void of consciousness. Then, a thin, needle-like spike of light appeared, not the sterile blue of the lab, but a sharp, frigid external light. His awareness accelerated toward this single point, seemingly passing through a non-space. He was recovering, not fragments of memory, but the raw recording of his capture. This is not their playback. This is my mind's final desperate download, retrieving the one moment of absolute truth before the surgical memory excision. The image stabilized, the small, insignificant research habitat, the vast, menacing sky, and his own figure standing alone on the ice. He understood that he was being given a final, unedited view of the event that brought him to the sterile tube. From his recovered memory camera perspective, the scene achieved terrifying clarity. The dark, seamless hull of the teardrop-shaped vessel was suspended above the clouds, encircled by a potent corona of golden light. He saw his tiny silhouette on the white expanse, looking upward. Without warning, a massive, focused column of pure golden energy erupted from the vessel's underside, striking the ice precisely at his location. The force was palpable, even in memory. Scientific instruments, ice shards, and compacted snow were caught in the field, spiraling upward in a chaotic vortex. His body was immediately seized and lifted, pulled vertically, trapped within the center of the brilliant golden cylinder. He was reduced to a small dark form ascending rapidly into the craft's dark underbelly. The sound was a low, deep, visceral rumble that eclipsed his own frantic heartbeat. In the blinding instant before the light consumed him entirely, the certainty was absolute. This is the mechanism, the precise, overwhelming force that erased my reality and transported me to the lab. This golden beam is the clean, efficient tool of my abduction. This raw, terrifying image was the final, definitive data point delivered to his mind. The golden light achieved maximum intensity, a solid, white detonation, and then, abruptly, vanished. Vance found himself lying on his back, gasping on the icy surface. The sky was a non-committal gray. Beside him, pressed into the ancient ice, was a faint, geometric circle, the ghostly imprint of the vessel's landing field. He sat up, his head throbbing. Everything between the moment he raised his camera and the moment he woke up was gone, a successful excision of memory. He pulled off his glove and instinctively rubbed the nape of his neck. His fingers located a small circular scar at the base of his skull, a fresh, geometric incision. He forced a logical, rational conclusion. Hypoxia. Severe hypothermia. I must have simply collapsed and drifted into unconsciousness. Nothing more. Yet the final, persistent thought remained. I do not recall the events that transpired, but in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, the terrifying pull of a brilliant golden light often returns, and I carry the certainty of having been pulled, however briefly, from the surface of this earth. Grant McCarthy thought he understood the Alaskan sky. Then the aurora stopped behaving like the aurora. A pale band froze rigid in midair, and inside it a perfect white line appeared, thin, steady, and too precise to be natural. In the same moment, the Twin Otter's radios fell into absolute silence. Digital systems began lying, and the shape in the sky started moving as if it could read the aircraft. This is not a story about chasing UFOs. It is about a repeating pattern that interacts with an aircraft like a controlled experiment. Communications cut out without static. Digital avionics drift into absurd errors, while analog instruments remain steady. A geometric form appears inside the aurora, rotates with mechanical smoothness, and then begins to match the plane's movement with unnerving precision. Grant McCarthy, 41, was trained to trust procedure, instruments, and weather models. His co-pilot, Renee Voss, carried the same discipline. Their route from Fairbanks to Barrow was familiar, remote, and usually uneventful. What happened on two separate flights suggested something else lived in that corridor, something capable of touching a machine in midair and leaving physical proof behind. Early February, the Twin Otter lifted from Fairbanks and flew north without issue for hours. Then the aurora formed ahead and stopped behaving like the aurora. A long east-west band of light froze rigid in mid-motion. Inside that frozen curtain, a single white line appeared, razor straight, pencil thin, bright enough to force a squint. It held perfectly still, too precise to feel natural. The cockpit failed in a way that felt selective. Radios dropped into absolute silence, primary and backup, with no static. GPS flickered and began reporting impossible jumps, altitude numbers spiking and collapsing, while analog dials stayed calm. Ahead, the white line rotated with mechanical smoothness, tilted slightly, corrected, then appeared closer in sudden steps, as if its distance updated between blinks. It split into three identical lines and arranged into a perfect triangle, point up, centered in the forward view. When Grant altered heading, the triangle rotated to stay aligned with the nose. When he adjusted altitude, it matched the change with exact timing. It was tracking. A harsh burst of static snapped through the headset, and a monotone male voice issued a directive to maintain heading and not deviate. The triangle flared once in intense white and vanished. The aurora resumed normal motion. Radios returned, GPS stabilized. Yet the aircraft recorded a communications loss the ground logs did not acknowledge. After landing at Barrow, the proof was on the airframe. Thick frost coated both wings, far heavier than expected, and a faint scorched discoloration marked the nose, which stayed warm long after shutdown. The official inspection found no shorts, no clear damage, no mechanical explanation. On paper, it became an unexplained malfunction with possible aurora interference. In the cockpit, it remained something else. Grant could not ignore how selective it had been. Radio silence without noise, digital lies without analog failure, geometry that behaved like a guided instrument rather than atmospheric light. In early March, Grant and Renee flew the same corridor again with no passengers. A single white point appeared ahead, then blinked out. The radio cracked once, and the same monotone voice returned, issuing a calm directive that tried to steer them by command rather than by control tower procedure. The temperature in the cockpit dropped rapidly, Frost crept along the windshield edges. The GPS flickered. The white point returned as a line, then divided into three, forming the triangle again as the aurora seemed to fade away behind it. The triangle held its position relative to the aircraft like a lock-on symbol, matching heading and altitude changes with exact timing. Then the aircraft's behavior shifted from abnormal to impossible. It dipped hard, then surged into a steep climb driven by full power without pilot input. The yoke locked. At 14,200 feet, the climb stopped instantly, and the aircraft held as if pinned in place, engines settling into idle without the expected fall. The triangle moved closer, and the pilots realized it was not the object. It was an outline, edges of something larger, dark, massive, silent, filling the forward view and erasing depth. Control returned violently during a sudden drop. At lower altitude, the aircraft stabilized and the dark mass disappeared. After landing, the physical marks were clearer. Frost again clung to wings. The nose discoloration remained. Beneath the fuselage, 3 parallel burn lines were scored into the paint, evenly spaced, precise as measurement marks. This time, the response did not stay inside rumor and logbooks. FAA investigator Patricia Keller confirmed the physical evidence aligned with the crew's timeline. The scorch patterns suggested thermal exposure rather than scraping, chemicals, or maintenance error. The burn lines under the belly were too uniform to be random damage, and the paint showed signs of heat applied in narrow bands. The frost samples showed unusual crystalline structure, closer to conditions the aircraft had not actually flown through. Even the heat on the nose after shutdown behaved wrong, lingering like the metal had absorbed energy and refused to give it back. What made it worse was the system-like behavior. The failures were selective, almost surgical. Radios went silent without the messy signature of interference. Digital systems became unreliable in clusters, while the analog instruments stayed stable enough to keep the crew alive. The geometry appeared inside the aurora, then acted like a tracking tool, rotating to remain aligned with the aircraft's nose and copying altitude changes as if it was reading a live stream of the plane's state. That suggested intent, or at least a process that responded to control inputs. Grant began searching for precedent. He found a declassified military report from the 1980s describing a strikingly similar event over the North Slope. Communications loss without conventional noise, navigation anomalies, and heat-related discoloration on aircraft surfaces. Different decade, different crew, same region, same fingerprint. The corridor was not producing a new anomaly. It was repeating an old one. That changed how the story felt. It was no longer a strange night with a strange light. It became a long-running pattern embedded in that airspace. A phenomenon that could reach into a cockpit systems, reduce a modern aircraft to partial blindness, then present a geometric form that behaved with the calm precision of machinery. It did not need to chase the plane. It only needed to establish rules, force compliance, and then release control once the demonstration was complete. The official conclusion remained conservative. Unknown aerial phenomenon, possible environmental influence, unexplained equipment malfunction. The words were safe because they did not claim more than regulators could prove. Operationally, the response spoke louder. Grant McCarthy and Renee Voss were reassigned to southern routes. The Fairbanks to Barrow corridor became a place their company preferred not to test again, not because they could define the threat, but because the threat had already proven it could touch an aircraft and leave marks that survived the flight. For Grant, the last meaning was personal and cold. That route felt claimed. Not claimed by a nation or a weather system, but claimed by an intelligence or mechanism that could impose behavior on machines in midair. The frost was a signature. The heat scars were a signature. The 3 burn lines were a signature. A way of saying contact happened, and contact could happen again. Grant never saw the lines again, but the pattern stayed. He kept flying, but he watched the aurora differently, scanning for the moment it might freeze, for the moment a perfect straightness might appear, where nature should only ripple. When other pilots mentioned radios going dead with no static, GPS jumping while analog stayed calm, sudden frost that made no sense, or heat scars on metal, Grant listened because he recognized the structure behind it. Now it turns to you. What fits better? Classified testing, rare atmospheric physics, or an intelligence imposing rules on machines in midair. If the sky signaled tomorrow, would you recognize a pattern or explain it away until it fades? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for new sightings, anomalous energy readings, and the repeating patterns hiding in plain sight. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Night in the Rockies. The cab is the only warm box of light for miles. Jackson grips the wheel as the road ahead looks edited, like someone erased the depth from the world and left only a flat strip of asphalt in its place. The beams from his truck still blaze, yet they stop short in midair, as if the darkness has weight. Then a pressure settles over the roof. Not wind, not weather, something vast and deliberate. The engine sound thins into a hollow hum, every gauge steady but meaningless, and the air inside the cab turns metallic and sharp. Jackson lifts his eyes to the windshield and realizes he is not approaching the anomaly. It is approaching him. October 2019, Colorado. The stretch from Grand Junction toward Gunnison is the kind of road that feels empty even when you are not alone. Just black mountains, cold air, and the hum of a diesel engine trying to keep you anchored to reality. Jackson had 15 years behind the wheel. He knew the difference between fear and imagination. That night, the road taught him a third thing. The line ran parallel to the highway, bright but sourceless, not blinking like aircraft lights, not shimmering like reflection, just a clean glowing stroke suspended in open air. Jackson slowed. Mary leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, trying to film it. The phone struggled to lock focus, hunting the darkness, refusing the line like it did not want to be recorded. Then the headlights failed in the strangest way. The bulbs still burned. The dashboard still glowed, but the beam would not reach the road. It stacked up in front of the grill, flat and useless, as if the night had turned solid. The truck shuddered and died. A hard cut of silence, no wind through mirrors, no engine vibration, just their breathing. Seconds later, everything returned at once. Engine, radio, normal light. Jackson drove on, trying to laugh it off. 10 minutes later, Mary checked the GPS. Same coordinates, same mile marker, same distance to Gunnison, still locked at 38 to 40 miles like the road had reset. They passed signs they had already passed. They saw a reflector that felt familiar, then impossible. Jackson kept driving anyway, because stopping made it feel worse. The line returned. This time it did not float beside the road. It stretched across the highway ahead, widening into a pale tear in the dark. The air around it looked wrong, like heat shimmer without heat. Jackson did the only thing his instincts could agree on. He put his foot down and drove straight through. The moment the truck crossed the seam, the pressure in their ears released. The GPS jumped forward. The next sign finally changed. The road began behaving like a road again. 3 months later, Jackson had to take Highway 50 again, daylight this time, alone. He told himself daylight meant safety. It did not. Midway through the run, he saw a woman in a white dress standing on the shoulder. No coat, no bag, no car nearby. Just her, perfectly still as if placed there. As he approached, the details broke. Her eyes sat too far apart. Her mouth looked too wide. Her skin had the waxy calm of a store mannequin trying to imitate a human being. Jackson stared, caught between braking and fleeing. The truck passed her, and she turned to follow him. Not like a person, like a display on a rotating stand. A smooth mechanical pivot that kept her face tracking the cab until Jackson could no longer see her in the mirror. Then Jackson felt it, that prickling certainty you get when you are being measured. Not watched casually, watched with purpose. A thought slid in, quiet and cold, not in words, but in meaning. We know you. Jackson told himself it was just a weird roadside moment. Then his CB radio hissed, one thin line of static, clean and steady, like a tone. No voice, no chatter, just a single frequency that didn't belong. A mile later, the world started to thin out. Not visually. Colorado still looked like Colorado, but sound became too clean. The tire noise dulled, like someone lowered the volume on the universe. Even the vibration through the wheel felt filtered. Jackson glanced at the clock. The digits looked normal, but the seconds didn't tick. So much as hold, like time was deciding whether to move. Then his headlights did something impossible in broad daylight. They were on, bright, normal, and yet the beam hit the air ahead and stopped, flattened against an invisible surface just beyond the hood, as if the light couldn't move forward. Jackson whispered, "No." He eased off the gas, instinct, then tried to correct back into the lane. The steering didn't resist, it wasn't stiff. It felt like the road had become a track and the truck was no longer his. And then the engine shut down. Not a cough, not a sputter, a clean surgical cut. RPM dropped to 0, the hum vanished. The cab became a sealed box of silence. He coasted to the shoulder, hands shaking, trying the ignition. Nothing. The dash stayed lit, but the lights looked wrong, too steady, too perfect, like a screenshot of a dashboard rather than a living system. Jackson looked down at his phone on the seat. The screen was awake. One word sat there as if it had always been waiting. Stay. He didn't remember unlocking it. He didn't remember anyone typing it. And then he saw the shadow. It wasn't cast by clouds. It didn't match the sun's angle. It slid over the road in a shape that shouldn't exist. A triangle, wide enough to swallow his rig. Jackson forced himself to look up. A black triangular craft hung above Highway 50, low, silent, with 3 faint points of light at its corners. No seams, no detail. It didn't reflect sunlight so much as refuse it. The air changed, cold pressure behind the eyes, a metallic bite like ozone. From the center underside, something unfolded. Not a spotlight, but a hard-edged column of pale light, as straight as a doorway drawn into the air. Dust stopped drifting. And inside that column, a figure resolved, tall, thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way, joints stacked where joints shouldn't be. It didn't walk down. It simply became present on the asphalt as if distance had been folded. Jackson's throat locked. He couldn't scream. Then the contact arrived, not through sound, but straight into his head, sharp and emotionless. Seen. A second pulse followed. Images that weren't his choice. The white hovering line from months ago, the GPS loop, the moment reality tore across the road. And then, the woman in the white dress, now not standing at the shoulder, but standing inside his memory like a bookmark. The same wrong face, the same fixed attention. Another thought pressed in, colder. Watcher, lure, alignment confirmed. The figure lifted a long hand and touched the truck's window. The fingers were too long, too many bends. The gesture wasn't threatening, it was testing, like learning what glass is. Jackson tried to move, his body didn't respond. Not paralysis, something worse. Like his impulse had nowhere to go. Then the final thought landed, heavy as a verdict. Marked, continued. Sound snapped back, wind, distant traffic. The creak of the cab, the column of light was gone. The triangle was gone. The phone screen returned to normal like it had never shown anything. The engine restarted by itself. Jackson sat there breathing hard, staring at empty sky, knowing the scariest part wasn't the shutdown, it was how precisely it had all been timed. As if the roadside woman wasn't random, she was a trigger, a sign that the next stage had begun. That night he checked his dashcam. The file list jumped from 2:13 p.m. to 2:29 p.m., 16 minutes missing. The gap wasn't a corrupted file. It was cleanly removed, as if somebody had highlighted a strip of time and cut it out. 2 days later, a plain envelope appeared in his mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single photo taken from high above Highway 50 in daylight, his rig on the shoulder, and above it, unmistakable, the black triangle hanging perfectly centered. At the bottom, one line, "You were seen." And Jackson finally understood what the woman's stare had been. Not curiosity, not warning, a handoff. Jackson says the worst part wasn't the craft. It was the feeling that Highway 50 had turned into a checkpoint and he'd been processed. Because you can explain a blackout, you can explain a GPS loop, but you can't explain a photo taken from above your truck when you never saw anything up there. So tell me, if it happened to you, would you keep driving or would you vanish first? What kind of light refuses to cast any shadow in fog? What kind of encounter deletes 32 minutes cleanly? And why did Hannah quit after hearing silence speak? Marcus Calloway worked WS. Nights for 11 steady years. He patrolled Highway 20 through the North Cascades darkness. He trusted culverts, chains, radios, and winter procedure. Halloween 2021 brought thick fog near mile marker 108. He and rookie Hannah Westfield checked drains beside the road. The forest felt muted, like it was holding its breath. Fog swallowed the slope near mile marker 108. Marcus saw blue light through the trees. Hannah assumed a flare. Marcus felt it was watching them. The glow stayed fixed as fog moved. It left no spill on wet leaves. It left no reflection on puddles. That absence made Marcus uneasy. They climbed carefully with flashlights held low. Boots slid on needles and slick moss. The air smelled metallic and cold. The forest sounded quieter than snow. The sphere appeared between trunks, perfectly centered. It hovered at chest height, motionless. It was about 3 feet wide. Its edge looked clean, almost drawn. Marcus aimed his beam at the sphere. The beam curved around it. The fog behind stayed unchanged. No shadow formed anywhere. Hannah stepped closer and stopped breathing. Her radio clicked once, then died. Marcus heard a thin hum in teeth. It felt like pressure without sound. The sphere pulsed brighter, then dimmer. Faint geometric lines appeared in fog. The lines formed a grid, then vanished. Marcus saw the hillside overlaid with other moments. He saw summer ferns replace winter needles. He saw charred trunks, then fresh saplings. He saw future headlights cutting new asphalt. Hannah whispered someone stood behind it. Marcus saw a tall, thin outline in fog. It moved without steps, then dissolved. The sphere remained patient and close. Marcus tried speaking, but words felt delayed. His watch froze on 1 minute. The truck lights down slope looked farther away. The sphere pulsed again, stronger now. A thought pushed into his mind. It showed caves under the mountain, glowing faintly. It showed slender figures moving in silence. Hannah grabbed Marcus and pulled hard. Her glove brushed fog beside the sphere. The air felt colder, like water. Her fingers went numb instantly. They backed downhill, never turning away. The hum followed them like an escort. The grid flickered once on Marcus's lens. They reached the truck and slammed doors. The cab clock jumped forward 32 minutes. Marcus checked logs and found a clean gap. Hannah stared into fog and started crying. Marcus hunted answers off duty, staying off station radios. He pulled night logs from sheds and old depots. Some pages were missing, yet staples stayed. Inked call signs were scrubbed into gray bruises. The gaps felt intentional, not sloppy bureaucracy. He found a recurring symbol in margin doodles. It looked like a triangle made of dots. Different hands drew it, years apart. Each time it sat near water-related notes, culverts, runoff ditches, creek bends, and spring seeps. The pattern felt like a warning, not folklore. Marcus drove Highway 20 alone and waited inside fog. The air grew heavy near a rock cut. His dash clock paused, then jumped 2 minutes. A pale blue shimmer rose over the ditch. It hovered without reflecting on wet asphalt. His flashlight beam bent, then wrapped around nothing. The shimmer pulsed and the forest went unnaturally quiet. Marcus heard a soft cadence under static, like counting. His radio lit up without transmitting any voice. The speaker returned his breathing, delayed by a beat. Frost formed fractal lines across his windshield edge. The lines traced angles, then locked into a grid. A tall, thin outline appeared inside the headlight glare. It moved without stepping across the ditch. Its shape stayed sharp inside drifting fog. Marcus saw long fingers touch nothing. Then air rippled. The grid on glass brightened, then vanished at once. His phone camera saved only black frames. Marcus backed away, never turning from the shimmer. The blue point followed, staying aligned with his cab. The engine stumbled, then steadied without his touch. The dash lights dipped in a synchronized beat. The cadence on radio paused, as if listening. Then it resumed with a new rhythm. Marcus returned home and found mud on boots, still frozen. His GPS history showed a route he never drove. A new waypoint sat over a creek bend. The label used his own typing style. Marcus understood the boundary, could write back. Marcus returned with Hannah, despite her earlier resignation papers. She said closure required one last drive. They chose November 21st, before closures worsened. Fog clung to trees near mile marker 115. The ditch water ran thin and black. 3 blue spheres appeared, forming a perfect triangle. The triangle held steady without drift. No shadow formed beneath any sphere. The air felt heavy and close. Their truck electronics died in one clean drop. The dash went dark, then stayed dark. Hannah's phone went black, then stayed black. GPS froze on a blank coordinate. Only the headlights stayed bright and steady. One sphere drifted closer, silent and smooth. It stopped beside the hood, perfectly centered. Marcus felt pressure behind his eyes. Hannah clutched her chest, breathing shallow and fast. A thought arrived without words or sound. Marcus saw 10,000 years of seasons. He saw glaciers retreat and forests return. He saw ancient fires, then silent regrowth. He saw hot vents under rock glowing faintly. Hannah whispered she saw someone inside the fog. Marcus saw deep thermal caves under ridgelines. He saw tall, slender figures in chambers. Their limbs looked too long for humans. Their eyes looked dark and unblinking. The spheres showed water channels under the highway. They showed culverts as access points. They showed drilling biting deep rock. They showed collapsed chambers and poisoned springs. Hannah tried to speak into the radio. The radio opened itself instead. A thin cadence came through, measured and close. It sounded like counting, then correcting. The cadence synced with the triangle's slow rotation. Fog around the spheres formed faint geometric seams. The seams connected into a grid for seconds. The grid slid across the windshield glass. It aligned with old etched frost lines. Hannah pressed her palm to the window. Frost fractals formed under her fingers instantly. Her hand stayed against the glass, unmoving. A tall, slender figure appeared beyond the ditch. It was not fully visible in fog. It looked like absence shaped into a body. It moved without stepping, then stopped. Marcus raised his flashlight toward it. The beam curved around empty air again. The figure lifted a hand with long fingers. The triangle tightened, shrinking its spacing slightly. The nearest sphere brightened like a signal marker. Hannah's breath fogged the glass, then stopped. Marcus called her name, but sound felt swallowed. Her outline blurred, then doubled in the headlight glare. For one heartbeat, two Hannahs overlapped. Then the passenger seat was empty. The seatbelt lay buckled, still warm. A blizzard hit without warning, drowning the road. A huge geometric structure settled onto the highway. Its edges looked sharp, then soft, then sharp. The structure hovered without sound or wind. The humanoid figure stepped out beside it. It stood tall and slender in blowing snow. It had long fingers with narrow joints. Its eyes looked black and almond-shaped. It did not speak with a moving mouth. The warning arrived inside Marcus's thoughts. We are not invaders. We live here. Respect this boundary or consequences follow. The figure raised one hand toward the forest. The spheres flashed once, then dimmed. Marcus saw ridgelines mapped in faint light. He saw triangle marks pulsing along drainage lines. Then everything shut down at once. The structure lifted without sound or wind. The spheres folded into one point and vanished. The blizzard noise returned in a rush. Marcus drove back alone, hands shaking on the wheel. He could not recall the next 10 miles. Hannah never clocked in again after that night. Her resignation file stayed unsigned, then vanished. Dispatch logs showed her truck never left the yard. Yet Marcus remembered her voice beside him. Marcus filed no report and kept private night logs. He searched ditches and culvert mouths at dawn. He found no tracks, no dropped gear, no answers. The boundary felt open, and it felt personal now. Did the spheres take Hannah, or copy her out of time? Tell me your theory, then hit like and subscribe. Clay saw an alien silhouette inside an amber sphere. The flock locked into a tight knot, eyes fixed outward. Then the sphere slid after him, staying just out of reach. 30 miles from the nearest town, the pasture should have felt ordinary. Instead, the air carried a wrong stillness and made his skin prickle. Clay noticed the flock gathering in a tight knot, as if bracing for something unseen. He walked closer and realized the silence was spreading first, then the fear. The sheep packed tight in the southeast corner at dusk. They refused grass and water, and they would not blink. Their bodies formed a blunt wall against the fence. Every head faced the same empty stretch of pasture. No bleats rose, not even a warning grunt. The air felt pressed flat over the grass. The distant highway noise seemed swallowed whole. Clay walked closer, and the flock tightened again. Hooves scraped once, then froze in place. Their eyes tracked something he could not see. The silence seemed thicker near that corner. It felt like a boundary he could almost touch. He stepped back and sound returned slightly. He stepped forward and sound thinned again. At 9:30, the stillness deepened without clouds. The stars looked sharper, almost cut into the sky. Clay felt cold seep under his jacket. The flock shifted suddenly to the northwest corner. They moved as one body, then stopped as one body. Their fear looked rehearsed, too synchronized. An amber sphere appeared 12 feet above the grass. It glowed hard, yet cast no light below. The glow did not paint the fence or ground. It looked bright, yet it felt contained. Inside, an alien outline stood upright and thin. Long arms hung in angled joints beside its body. Dark almond eyes held steady on Clay. The temperature dropped fast across the pasture. Clay's breath turned to white smoke instantly. The sphere slid forward as he backed away. It moved without wobble and without sound. It matched his pace with calm precision. Clay turned toward the house and kept walking. The sphere followed, staying just out of reach. On the porch, the light hovered near the steps. It held position like a patient guard. The alien inside tilted its head slightly. Clay felt a cold pressure behind his eyes. His thoughts slowed, then went empty for a beat. The sphere blinked once, then vanished. Sound returned at full volume, too sudden to trust. Crickets resumed as if on cue. The wind started again but felt delayed. Clay checked his phone and froze. The time had jumped forward without warning. He could not explain the missing minutes. Morning brought bright sun and a sick calm. The pasture looked ordinary from the road. Clay did not call neighbors or county deputies. He wrote the details down in careful lines. He forced his hands steady with clenched fingers. Then he walked to the southeast corner alone. A 10-foot circle marked the spot beneath the sphere. The grass inside was gray and brittle. It was not burned and not flattened. It crumbled like dried paper between his fingers. The soil beneath felt dry and powder fine. The circle edge looked cut with a tool. No tracks crossed into it from outside. That afternoon, the flock kept glancing at the same horizon. They grazed only in short, nervous bursts. Clay watched the sky until his eyes ached. He waited for night to prove him wrong. He returned after dark with cameras and a rifle. He placed tripods facing the pasture corners. He checked batteries twice, then checked them again. The air felt charged, like metal before lightning. The amber glow returned at the same height. Autofocus hunted, then failed, again and again. The camera view stayed soft and smeared. Phone batteries fell from half to dead in seconds. A low hum rose from the ground beneath him. It shook teeth and ribs with each pulse. The hum felt timed, not random. The sphere brightened and the fog inside cleared. Clay glimpsed a huge angular craft behind it. Its edges looked too straight for aircraft. It hung motionless beyond the fence line. A tall alien stood near the fence posts. It did not sway in the wind. It faced the house and held still. Clay's chest compressed as the hum deepened. His mouth opened, but his voice came out thin. The rifle felt heavy and useless in his hands. The sphere slid sideways with perfect control. The alien shifted position without walking. Then the light cut out without fade. Darkness returned like a snapped switch. Every device reported full power again. Camera batteries read full as if untouched. The hum stopped and left his ears ringing. The pasture stayed colder than surrounding air. Clay went inside and locked the door twice. He stared through the window at empty grass. He understood someone had measured his land. He also understood they could return whenever they wanted. 4 nights later, 3 lights appeared at once. They formed a perfect triangle above the pasture. The triangle held steady against invisible wind. Each light pulsed 3 beats, then paused. The pulses matched the earlier silence pattern. The triangle moved in steps, never drifting. It tightened above the house, then expanded over grass. Each step landed with perfect spacing. The flock turned in unison, tracking the pattern. Their hooves stayed planted, yet bodies trembled. One light stretched into a glowing cylinder. It held shape like rigid glass in air. The cylinder split into 8 threads of light. The threads wove symbols above the yard. Shapes folded into cubes and spirals. Then they refolded into impossible knots. Clay felt meaning press against his thoughts. No words formed, only direction and weight. His tongue tasted metal again. The air tightened around his ribs. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. The threads dropped lower over the dead grass circle. The brittle ring brightened from within, ember-like. A faint grid appeared across the ground. It aligned to the house and fence posts. Each grid intersection flashed once, then moved. The movement looked like counting and scanning. The wind stopped only inside the grid. Outside, grass still swayed in the night breeze. Inside, every blade held perfectly still. The grid lines brightened, then faded, repeating. Clay realized the pasture was a test field. The amber sphere returned beside the porch rail. It hovered closer than before, nearly arm length. The alien stood inside, clearer than ever. Its face looked smooth and wet stone. Dark eyes reflected no porch light at all. Long fingers rose, 3 at first, then more. It raised its hand toward Clay, slow and deliberate. The hum rose until Clay's vision shimmered. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He could not step forward or step back. His body felt pinned by invisible pressure. Images slammed into him in hard bursts. He saw animals viewed from far above, tagged and sorted. He saw pastures divided into geometric blocks. He saw underground chambers lit by amber pulses. He saw symbols carved into metal surfaces. Then those symbols peeled away like skin. One clear feeling remained: selection. The triangle pulsed faster and the grid tightened. The alien leaned closer inside the glow. Its eyes did not blink once. Then the lights snapped upward at impossible speed. They vanished without trail or fade. The grid faded last, line by line. Sound returned in a rush, painful and loud. Clay staggered, still tasting metal. At dawn, the flock clustered again in full daylight. They formed a tight knot near the center field. Clay lifted his camera with shaking hands. The fence wire hummed faintly, then stopped. He saw amber glow reflected in the dark window. Months passed, and the dead circle slowly grew green again. Clay kept working, but watched the sky like a sentry. He avoided telling his daughter the full truth. Nightmares came anyway, always with 3 beat pulses. When the sheep bunched at noon, he felt dread bloom. Do you think the aliens were warning, mapping, or claiming territory? Comment your theory, like, and subscribe for more Ranch Files.
Dean opened Unit 23 and found the odometer reading 0 miles. The dashcam file showed 47 seconds of white screen and a deep well echo. Dispatch swore he vanished for 15 minutes while he was still standing there. Dean Matthews is 38. He has patrolled the border 11 years. He trusted maps and procedure. He did not trust ghosts or aliens. Then October 3rd, 2024 arrived. Route 87 cuts through West Texas desert. Night there feels endless. Dean patrolled with a partner. Near midnight, a low hum rose southward. It pulsed in steady beats, then stopped. At 2:14 a.m., Dean found Unit 23 on the shoulder. The emergency lights pulsed in steady beats. The driver door stood open into dry wind. The cab was empty and too quiet. The engine block still felt warm. The odometer perfectly clean. Dean stared at the digits, then checked again. It was still 0, with no scratches. He checked the dash for dust lines. Everything looked reset, not replaced. The fuel gauge sat at half, like normal. The seatbelt hung straight and untouched. The steering wheel felt cool, not human warm. Dean searched the dirt near the door. No boot prints circled the cab. No drag marks crossed the sand. No scuffle marks cut the gravel. The road shoulder looked undisturbed. Even pebbles sat in neat clusters. His radio showed no bars at all. His phone showed no service either. The hum rose from the south again. It pulsed 3 times, then died. Dean opened the glove box and found the dash camera. He carried it to the patrol laptop. The file played with a clean timestamp. 2 officers stopped for strange road lights. One stepped out and faced the darkness. The other opened the door to follow. Then the image turned pure white for 47 seconds. No motion lines, no glare, just white. The audio held only a deep echo. It repeated like a well. Slow and hollow. The echo never matched their footsteps. When the picture returned, both were gone. The open door remained on screen. The emergency lights still flashed outside. The timestamp jumped forward without warning. Logs showed 6 missing minutes around that gap. Dean called dispatch and reported every detail. Dispatch said Dean vanished for 15 minutes. Dean checked his own watch and doubted it. He felt only 10 minutes pass, at most. Dean was forced onto leave after the roadside find. A plain envelope reached his home. No return address. Inside were copied reports and clipped photos. 17 cases across 8 years. Vehicles reset to impossible data. Radios dead, GPS wrong, and missing time. Some survivors carried geometric marks. Most described the same low hum. Many described lights moving against physics. A few described tall, thin beings near the lights. Large heads appeared in every account. Dean tried to dismiss it as rumor, yet Unit 23 matched the pages too well. 3 weeks later, the pattern found Dean again. He worked a different sector that night. His radio died mid-sentence. His GPS reset to unfamiliar coordinates. The hum returned and pressed into his teeth. 3 lights appeared off the roadway, holding formation. Dean counted seconds to stay anchored. His watch showed 4 minutes of tracking. His body felt less than 1 minute. Then the lights vanished at impossible speed. Dean stopped waiting for permission after that. He began investigating alone. He built a monitoring post at mile marker 43. He used hardened gear, backup power, and paper logs. On November 17th, intensity spiked hard. 7 lights formed a ring around his position. Radios failed at once, then stayed dead. The echo hid inside his head, not ears. 1 light dropped 20 feet away. A thin figure stood inside the glow. Upright and too tall. A question pressed into his mind. Do you understand? Dean could not answer fast enough. Then he lost 15 minutes of real time. Tests later found rare earths in his blood. Unit 23 never returned. The missing list grew anyway. 37 became 45. Then the numbers stopped being shared aloud. Dean kept their last location pinned on a paper map, a small X that never moved. He stopped telling himself it was accidents and errors. Something took people off Route 87, and it did it on purpose. Dean went back to Route 87 alone and stayed there. He drove the same loop at the same hours, week after week, as if routine could force a pattern to show itself. He logged everything with paper and mechanical tools, not just electronics. He wrote down each hum pulse, each radio blackout, each GPS reset, each moment his watch disagreed with the trot clock. He started leaving markers on the shoulder, then checking them later. Not once did he find a normal explanation that fit all the data. Then the UFO stopped hiding. One night the hum rose and the air went thick, and a craft appeared over the roadway like it had been there all along. It was huge, wider than the highway, a dark shape with no visible seams. It hovered without wind wash, without engine sound, without heat shimmer. Lights ran along its underside in clean geometric lines, not blinking like aircraft, but sliding like a signal. Dean watched it through the windshield, hands locked on the wheel, and the odometer flashed 0 miles again for 2 seconds before returning. On another night, the craft came lower, and Dean saw movement inside the light, not just glare. A tall alien figure stood within the glow beside his truck, human-shaped but too thin, head too large, eyes too wide to belong to any person. It did not walk in from the desert. It was simply there when the light arrived. Dean heard a voice in his mind, calm and precise, asking the same question from his earlier encounter. Do you understand? His mouth went dry. He tried to speak out loud and his radio crackled with the words instead, as if his thoughts were being routed through the speaker. The encounters multiplied. 3 escort lights would sweep ahead of his patrol route, then stop and hold formation, guiding him toward a spot on the shoulder. When Dean slowed, the UFO would appear above, and the desert would turn silent. He saw 2 more alien figures beside the road, standing in a line like survey posts. He forced himself to look long enough to describe them, then look away long enough to stay functional. Each time, time slipped. His watch would jump ahead, his body would feel only seconds. After one blackout, he found a fresh geometric mark on his forearm, sharp-edged and pale, like a pattern pressed under the skin. His boots carried fine white dust that did not match any local soil. Dean realized the missing minutes were not empty. They were filled with contact he could not fully remember. The dashcam whiteout was not glare. It was a controlled screen, a deliberate cut. The odometer 0 was not a glitch. It was a reset to baseline before they ran the next test. Unit 23 remains unsolved. The desert keeps its secrets, and Route 87 keeps its silence. Dean still patrols at night, waiting for the next hum pulse and the next impossible reset. Share your theory below, then hit like and subscribe so you do not miss the next report.
Alien discs came in thousands. They landed everywhere at once, and the invasion began. Alien discs appeared in the sky, not one region, everywhere. City edges, deserts, open water, remote plains. For a few hours, the planet watched the same impossible thing, silent shapes descending, hovering, settling. The word invasion filled every broadcast. Governments reacted with speed that felt like panic made efficient. Old rivals opened direct lines. Active conflicts paused without apology. Borders opened for convoys. Airspace was shared. Radar was shared. Intelligence was pooled. A global military coalition formed in days, not in trust, in necessity. Alongside the armies, a second coalition was assembled. A multinational team of scientists and analysts, signals experts, engineers, linguists, biologists, people built to understand an opponent. Evan Hale was pulled into that team as a translator and technical note-taker. His assignment was simple: help the coalition interpret alien intent. Help the coalition prepare for first contact. When the military plan was finally in place, the world held its breath. Jets were already airborne. Ships were positioned. Missile crews were on standby. Command rooms waited for the order to strike or the first incoming blow. That was when aliens spoke. Not with a roar, not with a broadcast voice. Clean text appeared across screens in multiple languages. We will speak. Send those who decide. Bring those who record. Political leaders did not trust it. Some called it a trap. Some called it psychological warfare. But the discs stayed still. No warning shots, no escalation. Only the same request repeating. After hours of arguments, the decision landed. If the invasion wanted a conversation, the planet would answer on controlled ground. A protected zone was built beside one landed disc. Fences, checkpoints, a neutral hall, no flags, no insignia. The scientists who had been assembled to resist were reassigned to speak. The team built to defeat Alien became the Knowledge Exchange Project. Evan went with them, believing listening was safer than guessing. The first meeting felt almost human. A tall, slender figure with smooth, pale gray skin stood across the table. Large black eyes fixed on the room without blinking. It did not sit. It did not gesture. Yet everyone felt the pressure of being evaluated. It offered knowledge, materials, energy, biology, navigation through folded space. But every offer came with a condition, a lesson, a method, a way to receive. When the delegation left the hall, the world split into arguments. Some leaders called it the greatest opportunity in history. Others called it an elegant hostage situation. Markets swung violently. Protests filled streets. Militaries stayed deployed. Ceasefires held by a thread. Every nation demanded a seat at the table. Every nation feared being left behind. Inside the coalition, paranoia became policy. Background checks doubled. Devices were banned. Notes were scanned, copied, locked. Evan's notebook was photographed page by page and sealed. A new plan formed overnight. A second meeting. Bigger. More observers. Harder safeguards. They would bring additional experts. They would ask for demonstrations, not promises. They would set limits, time limits, distance limits, rules for contact. And privately, they prepared for failure. Backup teams, evac routes, a strike plan that no one wanted to sign. Evan watched the schedule populate with names he could not pronounce. He watched the hall get rebuilt with thicker walls. He watched the world pretend it was still in control. The second meeting was set for 48 hours later. Evan wrote the date twice, then once more, as if repetition could anchor reality. The second meeting began with human confidence staged as control. Political leaders arrived with binders, lawyers, conditions. No recording devices inside the hall, no physical contact, fixed session length, a defined perimeter, a rotating delegation. None of it touched the real problem. But it sounded like governance, so they signed it. Alien agreed without hesitation, a small nod. No debate, no bargaining, as if the conditions were only ceremony. Then the alien reframed the entire event. This is instruction. The hall became a classroom, not with furniture, with demonstrations. A metal sample that restructured itself under a hand hover. A field that made weight behave differently for 3 seconds. A diagram that looked like nonsense until everyone in the room suddenly understood it at the same time. Evan wrote until his hand cramped. He felt lucky. He felt chosen. He believed the world had found a way to survive without burning. Outside the zone, the reaction was immediate. The first breakthroughs leaked as vague headlines. Energy, materials, medicine, impossible efficiency. Nations did not ask whether it was safe. They asked how fast they could get a seat. Rivals fought for time slots. Allies fought too. The coalition inbox flooded with requests. More delegates, more experts, more languages, more funding. Meetings multiplied. Third, fourth, fifth. A calendar so dense it looked like a siege schedule. Press conferences called it hope. Parliaments called it progress. Defense ministries called it advantage. Inside the project files, the name became permanent. Knowledge exchange, a door's opening, and the world pushed through it at a run. The lessons settled into routine. Daily sessions, small groups, rotating experts. Evan always present, always writing. At first, the instructions stayed practical. Materials that repaired themselves. Energy principles that made old grids look childish. Medical concepts that promised quieter hospitals. Then the curriculum widened, not abruptly, smoothly, like a natural next step. Alien began teaching the human instrument attention, stress control, memory compression, how to hold multiple models of reality without panic. Everyone wanted it. Leaders called it resilience. Scientists called it clarity. Therapists called it a revolution. Sessions turned into workshops. Volunteers raised their hands. People competed for seats. Evan did too. He felt proud to be useful. He felt lucky to be there. A new class appeared on the schedule. Merge. The word looked harmless on paper, like a seminar title. Inside the chamber, the lighting lowered into a calm glow. The hum was steady, almost soothing. Evan stepped forward when asked. No struggle, no defiance, just obedience shaped by trust. The alien raised a hand, long fingers, flat black eyes that never blinked. Its palm touched Evan's forehead. The contact felt impossible. Not a push, not pain. A sensation of passing through a boundary that should exist, like thought meeting thought. Evan's body went quiet, breath slowed, muscles softened, the room became distant, and then a life opened inside his mind. Not his, not Earth. He stood on a planet under a dim, colorless sky. The air looked thin. The light had no warmth. A plain of cracked stone stretched to the horizon. No trees, no water, no birds, only wind moving dust in slow sheets. There were structures in the distance, not ruins from war, ruins from abandonment, smooth towers half buried, metal ribs exposed, a civilization that had folded inward and left the surface behind. Evan felt the memory like lived experience, a body moving through cold gravity, a mind trained to listen for signals that were not sound, a loneliness that was not sadness, a function, a duty. He understood without being told. Alien were not visiting Earth for curiosity. They were rebuilding something, replacing something, preparing for a place that could no longer sustain them. The vision widened, a grid of worlds, some bright, most dim, paths between them like thin threads. Evan tried to pull back. He could not find the edge of himself. The foreign life kept flowing, calm, certain. When the chamber returned to focus, the alien hand was still there. Evan could not tell how long it had been. Seconds, hours. He looked down at his own hands and felt a strange familiarity, as if he had worn different hands for a very long time. Behind the alien, other tall figures watched in silence. Evan did not fear them. He only felt a quiet, expanding recognition. Then the hum deepened, light bloomed, and Evan's thoughts slid away into white. Evan woke up and tried to sit. His body moved late, like someone else approved the motion. He rushed to a mirror, his face split in expression. One half smiled calmly, the other half stared in horror. If Alien can pour a foreign life into a human mind, what remains of the original? Comment your answer below, then like and subscribe. Terry Weasley saw a huge warplane shape hovering above the pines. Its belly bristled with guns and stacked missile pods. The light hit him anyway, and he dropped before he could scream. Terry was 22, working timber alone near Black Canyon Lake, sent to finish a last task before dark while the rest of the crew headed back. Dusk sank fast between thick trunks, and the forest grew quiet in a way that made every small sound feel close. A strange glow slipped through the trees, and Terry stopped with his breath held, suddenly aware that no one else was nearby to confirm what he was seeing. The glow did not feel like a campfire or a truck light. It moved, steady and deliberate, threading between branches as if the forest was not an obstacle. Terry stood on a narrow dirt track with his flashlight off, one hand hovering near his radio, even though reception was unreliable out here. The air tasted sharp, like metal after lightning. Ahead, the tree line opened into a clearing. Something hung there, not a disc. A massive fighter craft, angular and heavy, wider than any plane Terry knew. Hard panels overlapped like armor. Underwing racks carried more missiles than looked possible. Dark gun ports lined the underside in rows. Yellow light bled from vents and seams, soft in color but wrong in behavior, as if it was measuring distance instead of illuminating space. Terry did not move at first. He stared until his eyes watered, trying to force the shape into something human-made. Then the craft shifted. It did not drift. It rotated. The nose pitched up and snapped down as if gravity had been switched off. It rolled a full 180, then 360, clockwise, then counterclockwise, stopping cleanly each time with no wobble. It slid left, then right, then reversed backward through the air without turning, as if forward and backward were the same direction. The whole mass stayed perfectly balanced, like it was mounted on an invisible gimbal that never strained. The movement was so controlled it felt unreal, less like a plane and more like an object being repositioned by thought. It did not drift. It corrected its position with perfect control. The sound arrived a heartbeat later, a layered roar mixed with a thin high frequency that made teeth ache. Terry felt the moment it noticed him, not because it turned, but because the light tightened. It narrowed from a glow into a focused band that swept the ground like a searcher. The beam passed over brush and stumps and stopped on Terry. His throat closed, his shoulders lifted. His hand finally snapped to the radio and he pressed the talk button, but only static answered. The beam stayed. Terry turned and ran. The forest turned into a flashing maze of trunks and yellow light. The hum followed him like a leash. A pulse struck his side and shut his body down mid-stride. Terry hit the ground hard. For a moment he could not tell if his eyes were open or closed. The world narrowed into flickers, yellow, black, like a malfunctioning film reel. His breath came in shallow jerks, each inhale scraping against a weight that did not belong in his chest. Above the canopy, something shifted. He sensed the craft more than he saw it. A pressure moving overhead, a change in the way the air held sound. The high frequency slid into a steadier tone that made his teeth vibrate. In the brief gaps between blinks, he caught the underside crossing a break in the branches, armor panels, rows of dark gun ports, stacked missile racks, seams glowing in a slow repeating pattern. The light thickened again, pinning him in place. Terry tried to lift a hand and felt nothing answer. The needles under his cheek felt distant. His thoughts stretched out, slow and heavy, and images began to leak into his mind without permission. A clearing, a spinning craft, the beam locking on him like a finger. The last clear sensation was a gentle pull, not dragging, not lifting, a shift that made the ground feel less certain. Then the flicker stopped. Terry sank into darkness, so complete it felt engineered. He felt no hope at all, utterly hopeless. Terry was found later on the track with pine needles in his hair and a blank look that frightened the people who helped him up. He could say his own name. He could walk. But when they asked what happened, his eyes drifted and his answers fell apart. The simplest explanation won by default. Lightning. The region was known for it, and Terry's confusion fit the story people wanted. He was told he had been knocked down, dazed, lucky to be alive. For a while he accepted it because accepting it meant he did not have to fight his own mind. Then one afternoon, a real strike hit nearby. The crack split the air. But for Terry, the sound was not just loud, it was a key. His knees buckled and memory detonated. He saw the night again, but now the missing center snapped into place. The huge fighter craft hovered above the clearing, its armor panels catching the yellow seam light in slow pulses. No heat shimmer, just a shape unfolding with quiet authority. The first visitor stepped down and paused, looking at the trees as if reading them. Then more followed in a measured file. Slender build, pale blue-green skin, long silver hair, large violet eyes, faint markings along the neck, wearing a layered alien travel outfit. Their outfits caught the yellow glow and swallowed it, fabric layered over fitted armor like travel clothes designed for many climates. Their boots left almost no imprint. Their hair moved gently even when the air was still. Two of them carried long instruments with narrow ends that swept over the ground, drawing invisible lines across soil and sand. A third held a compact container that opened in a perfect oval, then sealed again without a sound. Another stood slightly apart, watching Terry's direction without turning fully toward him. They went straight to the strike zone. Where lightning had fused the earth, glassy fulgurite lay hidden like frozen electricity. The visitors located it as if they could feel it through the ground. They knelt, lifted brittle tubes and shards with careful fingers, and placed them into the container one by one, each piece handled like a component, not a souvenir. Terry remembered trying to back away, his heel catching on a root. A twig snapped. The line of visitors did not flinch. One of them looked directly at him. The violet eyes held a soft glow that did not reflect the beam like human eyes. It seemed to carry its own light, calm, patient, and unsettlingly focused. A hand rose. The yellow seam light tightened into a narrow band, and Terry felt a pressure slide across his thoughts. His panic did not explode. It folded. He tried to form a sentence in his head, and the middle of it vanished. He tried to remember the shape of the craft, and the edges blurred, as if someone had rubbed an eraser over the lines. The clearing stayed, but details fell away in layers. First, time. The order of moments stopped making sense. Before and after swapped places. Then, faces. He could look at them and still not hold them. The long silver hair became only brightness. The markings along the neck became only texture. Then, intention. The idea of what they were doing tried to surface and was gently pressed down, not with violence, with control. Terry felt his memory being smoothed flat, like wet clay wiped clean and made ready for a new imprint. A new thought settled in, simple and believable. Lightning. Just lightning. The last clear image he retained was that calm violet gaze close to his face, unblinking, while the craft hummed above them like a ceiling. After that, there was only darkness. When Terry told people what came back to him, most treated it like shock, like a dream his brain had invented to fill a blank. A few listened differently, not believing, not dismissing, just watching his hands shake when lightning flashed again. No one could prove what took Terry, but the sky kept returning. The fulgurite theory gave the fear a shape. What do you think the visitors truly wanted from the fulgurite? Comment your theory below, then like and subscribe. Thomas pulled a frame from the decoded stream and saw a ruined city of impossible towers under spiral emergency lights. At street level, a stocky quadruped alien prowled in full view, covered in coarse orange fur with thick dark stripes, its head broad and eyeless with bony ridges, flared nostril slits, and a wide mouth packed with blunt, sharp teeth. It lifted clawed paws, sniffed the air as if tracking through the signal itself, and Thomas realized the message was watching him back. Thomas Whitmore worked nights at a deep space observation facility in New Mexico, the kind of place where silence was part of the job. While classical music played softly in the control room, he noticed a spectral pattern that refused to behave like nature. It was modulated, structured, and it returned at a precise interval. Thomas began recording everything, building layers of analysis until the signal started to unfold into more than data. It became content. Images, audio like faint coded rhythm, information stacked inside information. Thomas knew that if he showed the wrong person too early, it would disappear into locked archives, so he decoded first. The deeper Thomas went, the older the message became. The light had traveled hundreds of millions of years before reaching his instruments, sent from a world that existed when Earth was still learning what life could be. The civilization in the message called itself the Eternal Architects. Their record showed a population spread across countless worlds, building megastructures that ignored the limits Thomas trusted. The largest project was described as a threshold, a transit system that made distance meaningless inside their empire. At first, the archive felt like triumph, proof that intelligence had flourished long before humans. Then Thomas found the personal log of a high-ranking gate warden. The log described a dead planet orbiting a black hole and ruins older than the architects by billions of years. The artifacts recovered from those ruins violated causality in ways the writer could not fully explain. After the artifacts arrived, the empire changed. Scientists began dreaming of vast empty spaces and the sensation of being watched from angles the mind could not visualize. Across worlds, people started moving in synchronized patterns, building structures with no clear purpose, as if following choreography they did not remember learning. Satellite images in the archive showed entire planets going dark, leaving only thousands of lights traveling in spiral formations across night surfaces. The Gate Warden's final entry was a confession. The artifacts were bait. They had invited something older than starlight, something that lived in adjacent dimensions and did not fit the rules of human existence. They believed they could approach the abyss and remain unchanged, but they were wrong. Thomas tried to warn officials the moment he decoded the first message. He brought charts, timestamps, and the repeating interval that proved intent. He described the ruined city, the emergency spirals, and the sense that the signal was not a greeting but a last record. No one wanted panic attached to a deep space facility. He was told to slow down, to stay inside procedure, to wait for confirmation. Then a second message arrived. Different origin, same desperation, the same orbital map. Fear flooded the facility in slow waves. People stopped joking. Conversations became whispers that died when someone new entered the room. Thomas watched hands hover over keyboards without typing, as if everyone was waiting for the next line of the message to crawl out of the speakers. Sleep became impossible. The repeating interval started to feel like a countdown inside the walls. Coffee did nothing. Silence felt like listening. When Thomas walked the corridors, he felt watched by empty camera domes and dark windows. Even the air felt thinner, as if the building was holding its breath. Then the third message arrived, close enough to feel personal. The room changed. Faces went pale. No one argued anymore. Orders went out. Military units were told to deploy. Thomas should have felt relief. Instead, the fear sharpened. If the warnings were real, then belief came late. Thomas barely had time to process the weight of it when the building lurched. A scream of tearing metal shook the floor. Lights snapped off. Somewhere above the control room, something massive hit the facility like a thrown planet. Thomas stumbled, tried to grab the console, and the world tipped into darkness. Thomas woke to muffled voices and the hard rhythm of boots. Emergency lights washed the corridors in dull red. He tasted dust and cold air and realized hours had passed. A soldier found him and hauled him upright, keeping a weapon trained down the hall. The facility was under military control now. Teams moved in tight formation, scanning corners, calling out clear signals, treating every shadow like it could move. Thomas tried to ask about the others. No one answered at first. When they reached the main work area, Thomas saw why. The other scientists were gone from their stations, found collapsed in places that did not fit the crash. No debris pinned them, no fire touched them, just a terrible stillness, as if something had walked through after impact and turned life off. Thomas felt the fear in his throat, thick and sour. The escort tightened around him and moved. Then the hallway went quiet. A faint clicking traveled through the metal like a code. Something unfolded from the darkness above a doorway. It was tall and sinewy, covered in a smooth black exoskeleton that looked like wet armor. Its elongated, ridged head curved backward like a blade, with no visible eyes, only shallow sensory pits. Long limbs ended in narrow clawed fingers that gripped the walls with silent precision. A segmented tail trailed behind it, whipped fast with a sharp bony tip. When it opened its mouth, a second inner set of jaws slid forward on a jointed track and snapped the air. The unit fired. Muzzle flashes stuttered down the corridor. The creature moved like it already knew the angles. It clung to the ceiling, dropped behind cover, and struck in sudden bursts, forcing the soldiers to break formation. Radio calls became fragments. A line of fire lit the hall. The creature vanished into vents and shadows, then reappeared where no one expected, turning the corridor into a trap that kept changing shape. Thomas was dragged behind a concrete support and kept low. He could hear the scrape of claws above him. He could hear the tail strike metal with a dry crack. He could hear soldiers shouting and then going quiet. The fight became a series of desperate seconds. A soldier tried to flank, and the creature cut off the angle. Another tried to hold the corridor, and the creature came from above. Thomas saw it drop in front of the team, inner jaws snapping, and felt his stomach turn as the soldiers fired again and again. The exoskeleton chipped but did not break. Then the creature lunged toward Thomas. The last remaining soldier shoved Thomas down and took the hit that was meant for him, buying a single breath of time. Thomas crawled backward, shaking so hard his hands could barely move. The soldier rose anyway, bleeding and furious, and forced the creature back with sustained fire. The creature recoiled, tail lashing. It tried to climb. The soldier threw a final charge at the wall behind it. The blast hammered the corridor. Dust and fragments filled the air. When the smoke cleared, the creature lay still, its exoskeleton split, its movements gone. Thomas grabbed the soldier's arm and ran. They staggered through a torn service passage and burst out into cold night air beyond the facility. Behind them, the building burned in silent pulses of emergency light. Thomas stood outside, shaking, watching smoke crawl into the sky. He knew the signals had not been a story. They had been an arrival. Thomas and the soldier did not stop until the dark swallowed the perimeter fence. If you think the message was a warning or a lure, comment your theory. Like and subscribe for the next episode. Welcome to The Void. Tonight, we're not just discussing a single witness sighting. We are diving into a case so rich in corroboration, so bizarre in its details, that it remains a cornerstone of ufology nearly 5 decades later. His name was Filiberto Cardenas, a Cuban immigrant living in Miami, Florida, in 1979. What happened to him on that quiet January night didn't just change his life. It revealed a terrifying, methodical depth to the alien presence on Earth. This is not a typical lights in the sky story. This case has multiple independent eyewitnesses confirming the initial event. It involves an object left behind as physical evidence. Repeated hypnotic regression sessions across different specialists validated it. But most terrifyingly, Filiberto returned with 108 unexplained marks etched onto his body, and a vivid, consistent memory of a being on a golden throne who spoke to him in perfect Spanish from a hidden subterranean base. Forget the cliches. This is the Cardenas abduction, and here's what the investigators uncovered. The date was late January 1979. Filiberto Cardenas was driving with 3 friends in a remote, quiet area outside Miami. They were engaged in a typical evening, unaware they were about to become unwilling participants in one of history's most documented close encounters of the fourth kind. Suddenly, the vehicle died, not gradually but instantly. This classic electromagnetic effect, EM effect, is often reported in UFO encounters, indicating a sophisticated technological presence overwhelming terrestrial electronics. As the car stalled, a massive, silent, disc-shaped craft descended slowly nearby, casting an eerie, focused glow on the surrounding area. According to the witnesses, Cardenas was immediately struck by a powerful, invisible energy. He was rendered instantly paralyzed, unable to move, speak, or resist. He was then, against all physics, levitated, slowly and silently lifted into the belly of the immense ship. His 3 friends, witnessing this impossible, terrifying scene, fled the location in sheer terror, becoming the first crucial piece of external corroboration. Crucially, this event didn't happen in isolation. Reports later surfaced suggesting that air traffic control personnel at a nearby airport also observed an unidentified flying object exhibiting unusual speed and maneuvers in the vicinity at the exact time of the abduction. This multiple source confirmation, linking ground witnesses to military or official observation, elevated the Cardenas case from a single sensational claim to a documented investigation. Inside the craft, the terrifying medical procedure began. Filiberto found himself in a large, sterile room, surrounded by the classic gray entities. He described them as short, approximately 4 feet tall, with large black eyes and smooth grayish skin. These grays subjected him to a full, invasive physical examination, utilizing strange small tools and focused lights. The examination was harrowing, but the most compelling and unique proof he carried back was physical. 108 small, perfectly circular marks etched across various parts of his body. These were not scars from old injuries. They were fresh, consistent, and meticulously placed. Investigators later photographed and documented these marks. What were they? Puncture wounds? Microburns from advanced sensor devices? Regardless, the precise number 108 strongly suggests a methodical, deliberate process, a scientific tally or diagnostic procedure. Cardenas returned with a physical receipt, a quantified injury that dramatically separates his story from typical abduction narratives. The medical examination was merely the prerequisite. The core purpose of the abduction was far grander, and it took place not on the ship, but in a different, hidden location. Cardenas later recalled being transported to a massive underground or undersea base, a structure described as a huge, technological cavern, giving the impression of a vast, naturally occurring underground chamber. Here he encountered an entity unlike the short, silent grays. This was the chief, the commanding presence. This being was tall, standing between 6 and 7 feet, majestic and uniquely intimidating. He wore a long, flowing dark yellow or gold cape and sat upon a large, ornate throne. He was the master. This detail of a high-ranking human-like figure is relatively rare and highly significant, suggesting a hierarchical structure within the alien operation. But the biggest shock came when the entity began to speak. He communicated not just telepathically, but verbally, in perfect, flowing Spanish. This suggested an ancient intimacy with human culture and language, implying they had been observing and operating on Earth for a very long time. The chief delivered a solemn and direct warning. Humanity was on a path to self-destruction. Through pollution, continuous warfare, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, Earth was jeopardizing its own future. He stated that the alien program was a genetic preservation effort. They were methodically collecting and studying samples to ensure the survival of the human species, should we ultimately fail to save ourselves. This aligns the Cardenas case with the controversial but well-documented theory of a widespread hybridization or genetic monitoring program. Before Cardenas was returned, the chief bestowed upon him a gift and a concrete piece of evidence. A small metallic ring inscribed with alien symbols, a script unknown to any human language. This object became the third piece of physical evidence, alongside the 108 marks. While laboratory tests on the ring's material and potential radioactivity were inconclusive in proving its extraterrestrial origin, the foreign symbols cemented the reality of the encounter for Cardenas and his supporters. The story did not end with Filiberto's return. Weeks later, he received a powerful telepathic message. They wanted him back, but this time, he was instructed to bring his wife, Margarita Cardenas. The second abduction involving Margarita provided the final, crucial element of corroboration. The investigation was primarily conducted by respected ufologist Virgilio Sanchez Osejo. Understanding the limitations of conscious memory, both Filiberto and Margarita underwent multiple sessions of hypnotic regression with different specialists. The results were astonishing. Under deep hypnosis, both Filiberto and Margarita recounted their experiences, the paralysis, the grays, the chief, the subterranean base, with unwavering consistency across all sessions. Skeptics often dismiss regression therapy, but in the Cardenas case, the level of complex, consistent detail, especially regarding the specific count of the 108 marks and the chief's unique appearance and command of Spanish, makes pure fabrication highly improbable. This convinced many professional researchers that they were dealing with genuine, though suppressed, memories of a traumatic shared experience. The Filiberto Cardenas case remains a highly detailed and heavily corroborated file. It is solidified by a convergence of evidence: multiple eyewitness accounts at the scene and the airport, physical marks, the 108 count on Cardenas's body, the unusual metallic ring, and the consistent hypnotic testimonies of two family members. This case leaves us with profound questions. Were the 108 marks a biological diagnostic receipt? Was the entity on the throne truly a powerful figure in an alien genetic preservation program? And what does it mean that an advanced being, operating from a hidden base, was fluent in our languages? The Cardenas family sacrificed their privacy and endured scrutiny to share this terrifying truth. Their legacy is a reminder that the phenomenon of alien abduction is not just about lights in the sky. It's about a methodical, intelligent, and ongoing interaction with humanity. Do you believe the 108 marks were definitive proof of a foreign diagnostic device? Or do you think the consistency of the stories was simply a case of shared psychological trauma? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The blast did not sound like an explosion. It looked like one. A vertical spear of electric blue punched upward from Tango 7 and turned the snowfield into daylight for a single breath. Calvin Rhodes was already running, Brooke Anders close behind, boots biting into hard drifts as the air burned cold in their lungs. When the light collapsed, the station was gone. Not broken, not burning, not scattered into debris. The antenna mast, the wind wall, the weather dome, the fuel drums, the whole footprint of human shelter simply did not exist anymore. There was only perfectly smooth snow, unmarked and untouched, as if Tango 7 had never been built. The horizon returned to darkness, and something tall remained out there watching, too many silhouettes to count before the night swallowed them again. Calvin had worked Arctic rotations long enough to believe he understood isolation. 6 years at northern research posts teaches you what darkness does to time and nerves. 3 weeks into the deep winter shift, he and Brooke were the only two people at Tango 7, 70 miles north of the Arctic Circle, surrounded by permanent night and temperatures that hovered around -38. He had heard older crews talk about strange lights and missing hours, the kind of stories that never survived paperwork. It was not that he had never considered the possibility. It was that he refused to believe it could be real until it reached down and shut the world off around him. Midwinter at Tango 7 meant permanent night and air cold enough to sting the lungs on every breath. Calvin Rhodes was checking the magnetometer along the eastern instrument belt when the horizon changed shape. A thin, pale yellow band appeared perfectly horizontal across the east, too straight to be aurora, too steady to be weather. It did not ripple, it did not drift. It held like a line drawn with a blade. Then a second detail surfaced above it, a dark craft shape hanging in the sky, wide and silent, with no blinking markers and no engine noise. Its underside looked smooth and featureless, except for 3 faint points of light spaced with geometric intent, dim enough to feel deliberate. The station radio died into absolute silence. Not static, not fade, just nothing, as if every frequency had been shut off at the source. Inside the station, digital displays began to blink and drop, batteries collapsing from full to empty in minutes. Outside devices refused to stay on long enough to record a frame. On a perimeter camera feed, the snowfield near the north berm briefly showed a tall figure standing upright, far too slender to be a bear, too still to be a person in wind. It was roughly 20 feet from the fence line, and it pulsed in sync with the yellow band, like the light was controlling both the sky and what stood beneath it. The feed darkened and vanished. When the systems returned hours later, the band and the craft were gone, leaving only the normal Arctic horizon. But Calvin could not shake the memory of that silent object above the line, and the impossible certainty that something had been close enough to look back before the station went blind. They did not report the light or the vertical shape. Without footage, it would become a story, and stories in a government chain become assessments, evaluations, and quiet removals. They wrote only what could be described as technical anomalies and tried to return to routine, but the station felt altered, as if the walls had become thin. During a final perimeter check, Calvin saw the snow outside the wind wall and froze. The ground held prints that were not prints. Perfect circles were pressed into the snow, each nearly 4 feet wide. They were spaced apart with no trail between them, no scuff marks, no stride marks, nothing to explain travel. The circles formed a pattern that began north of the station and curved around it in a tightening spiral. Inside each circle, the snow looked polished, smooth, not compressed, not melted, as if the surface had been finished rather than stepped on. A thermal scan showed the circles were warm, not slightly warm. Warm enough to stand out like fresh metal in cold air, around 40 degrees, more than 60 degrees above ambient. There was no residual radiation and no heat source below. Just warmth held in perfect geometry, a signature left behind. 3 nights later, the phenomenon returned, different but more aggressive. A deep electric blue band appeared not on the horizon but higher in the sky, angled 30 degrees, stretching north to south. It began descending. The station power failed completely. Emergency systems stayed dark. Inside, temperature climbed rapidly, heat bleeding in as if something outside was radiating into the building. Through a window, Calvin saw the blue band hovering 10 feet above the snow, tall and narrow, impossibly thin yet brighter than any flare. From that light, a tall blurred form began to emerge, not walking in, but pressing through as if the air had turned into a membrane. They fled west into open snow. Behind them, Tango 7 erupted into a column of blue light that punched upward and lit the world so hard it threw sharp shadows across the tundra. In that glare, the snowfield was crowded with motionless figures, dozens, then hundreds, tall shapes spaced out as if arranged, all facing the same direction. Then the light cut off. Where the station had stood, there was nothing. No wreckage, no crater, no scattered panels, only untouched snow, smooth as a blank page. 6 months later, Calvin and Brooke returned north, 50 miles from where Tango 7 had been erased. The tundra greeted them with geometry. Circular impressions, nearly 4 feet wide, sat in ordered patterns instead of trails. Every circle held warmth through gloves, heat sealed into the snow without meltwater. From higher ground, the layout resembled a coastline map stamped into the ice. At 3:47 a.m., all electronics died at once. Cameras went black. Satellites dropped. Screens blanked. The air thickened, and a slow vibration rose through the ground, deep and rhythmic, like a massive engine idling beneath the world. Frost crept higher along fabric seams, not from wind, but from cold that felt switched on around them. Then the gold band appeared, perfectly horizontal, suspended over the tundra like a ruler line drawn across reality. Above it, a UFO resolved out of darkness, massive and silent, swallowing starlight. Its underside was smooth and curved, with recessed points of faint light arranged in precise geometry, matching the warm circles below. A thin vertical beam dropped from the craft to the band and down to the ground, clean and pale, outlining a corridor rather than lighting it. Inside the beam, the darkness looked dense, almost glassy. Snow beneath it did not stir. Along that beam, alien figures emerged, tall and narrow, long-limbed, their edges wavering as if they were not fully solid. They did not crunch through snow and left no footprints. They appeared in positions as if placed, facing Calvin's line of sight, spaced with measured intent. Some turned their heads in smooth arcs without shifting their bodies. Their surfaces were matte and dark, with faint pulses moving beneath them like light under skin, matching the vibration in the ground. The UFO lowered slightly. The beam brightened once. The warmth inside the circles intensified, and the snow within each ring looked subtly polished, as if its surface had been restructured. One figure occupied a nearer position, close enough for shallow facial contours to be visible, eyes that did not shine yet held attention like a sensor. Meaning pressed into Calvin's mind without sound, a demand shaped like a question, followed by an answer delivered as images. Tango 7 had not been destroyed. It had been removed, pulled out of a place it did not belong, a human structure interfering with layers of reality it was never meant to occupy. Calvin stopped thinking of the Arctic as empty. He began thinking of it as occupied. The lights were not a mystery flare in the distance. The prints were not a prank. The station was not destroyed. It was erased. If you ever work under permanent night and you see a perfectly horizontal band that does not ripple, or you find warm circles pressed into snow with no trail between them, do not assume you are alone. Assume you are standing near the spaces between, and that something tall is already facing your direction, waiting to see if you look back. The basement dispatch room in Santa Rosa is so quiet, Leona Ward can hear the fluorescent lights breathing. Then the clock flips to 2:11 a.m., and every line on her console lights up at once. Not one caller, not two, all of them. Static floods her headset, thick, wet-sounding interference like the desert itself is trying to talk through a dead radio. Voices break in and out, a man screaming, a child crying, a woman praying, then all of it collapses into a single, impossible silence. Leona leans closer to the screen, waiting for coordinates to populate. They don't. And then, without sound, without a phone line, a word lands inside her mind, cold and command-like, as if it's being read directly into her thoughts. Return. Leona has worked 911 dispatch for 12 years in a town so small it feels like a dot on the map. Santa Rosa, New Mexico, a stop along Route 54, a black ribbon of highway slicing through open desert. Her night shift runs midnight to 8 a.m. Most hours are nothing. Lonely motorists, stray animals, the occasional drunk who can't find the motel. Out here, the desert keeps its own schedule, and for reasons Leona can't explain, it started calling her at 2:11 a.m. Firstly, Leona answers a call drowned in thick static, like the signal is being squeezed. The man says his name is Michael Valdez. He's on Route 54, alone in the desert. He's terrified, not because something is following him, but because it's matching him. A cluster of bright lights holding steady distance, too clean, too steady, with no aircraft blink pattern. Then his voice tightens. Radio died, GPS died, phone's glitching, only 911 still connects. Leona tries to locate him. The system returns nothing, no coordinates, no map pin, like the call isn't coming from anywhere real. Michael says the road feels wrong, like he's driving into dense air. He swears he passed the same reflector post twice. The static swells and his voice warps for a second, still his but stretched thin. "It's not behind me anymore," he whispers. Leona asks where it is. A pause, in front, like it's waiting. He describes a perfect white line suspended in the air, too straight to be natural, hanging across the dark. And inside the glare, he says he can see figures, not shadows, more like silhouettes behind a veil, shifting when the light shifts. A low hum rises under the static. Michael starts to shout, "It's coming down," and the call cuts off mid-breath, clean and instant. Leona refreshes the archive. There's no recording, no normal log entry, only a corrupted 8-second file of pure static. PD patrols Route 54, no gray Honda, no skid marks, nothing. Later, they confirms Michael is home, confused, insisting he never went out. His car sits in the driveway, dust-caked, untouched. Leona can't forget the one impossible detail. Out there, whatever was happening, 911 was the only thing that could still hear him. 3 weeks later, Leona is back on the night shift, watching the clock slide toward 2:11 a.m. The line hits with that abrasive static, thicker than noise, like pressure. A woman gasps out her name, Sarah Baker. She's on Route 54, mile 265, and something is following her. Her GPS is frozen, her dash glitches, and yet somehow 911 still connects. Leona pings the call, her console answers with a blank field, as if Sarah is speaking from a place the map can't name. Sarah describes a light that isn't headlights, red-white pulses, steady as a heartbeat, hovering too high for any vehicle. Then her voice tightens. "My steering wheel's going stiff, like it's being held. The static swells." Sarah whispers that the brightness is opening like a seam, and inside it she can see tall, thin shapes stepping out, too long-limbed, too precise, as if they're copying how a person moves. Leona orders her to stop, lock the doors, stay inside. Sarah inhales sharply. "It's in front of me." There's a white click. The call ends cleanly. Leona checks the logs. No recording, no proper entry, just another gap. Patrol sweeps Route 54 and finds nothing. Later, another department confirms Sarah is home asleep, her car parked outside, no memory of leaving. Leona stares at the empty file slot, because now she's sure of one thing: whatever owns 211 is learning. 3 weeks after Sarah's call, Leona stops trusting quiet. 2:11 a.m. All of it breaks. Not one call, several slamming into the console at once. Different lines, different voices, same panic threaded through them like a shared current. A man is yelling over wind and static that doesn't sound like weather. Mile 277, Route 54, we're stopped. He isn't saying we pulled over. He's saying we were made still. Behind his voice, a chorus, women crying, a kid screaming for someone to wake up, a car horn stuck down and then cutting off as if the sound itself was unplugged. Leona tries to pin the calls down. Anything, tower, cell path, a hint of location. The screen doesn't fail. It behaves perfectly, smooth and blank, like it's politely refusing to admit the calls exist. Then the man's voice rises into a raw, disbelieving shout. It's right above us. It's a triangle. The word triangle is all she gets before the line distorts into something thick and metallic, like a radio chewing on a magnet. In the distortion, another voice appears, not frantic, not human, not even through the speaker, more like it's being laid over the room. Leona's ears ring, her teeth ache. The air in the basement turns dense, as if the desert has pressed its face against the building. And then a single word arrives inside her mind, with no sound attached to it. Not heard, not imagined. Placed. Return. Leona's hand goes cold on the desk. She stares at the console like it might start bleeding. She tries to breathe, but the word sits in her chest like a weight that doesn't belong to her. The calls cut off together. No fade, no click, just gone. Minutes later, the first patrol unit reaches mile 277. When the officer radios in, his voice is controlled in that way that means he's forcing it. 5 vehicles, all on the shoulder and partway into the lane. Hazard lights on, engines running. Leona grips the edge of her desk. No occupants, he continues. Doors open on 2, phones on seats. One car has a kid's shoe, just one. Her stomach drops. He adds something quieter, like he doesn't want the desert to overhear him. There are marks on the road, 3 circles, burned down to the aggregate, placed like someone measured it. Leona writes it down anyway, because writing is the only thing that makes it feel real. 3 burns. Triangle. No skid marks, no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Just 5 running cars and 12 missing people, as if they were removed from the scene the way a hand lifts pieces off a board. Leona realizes 211 isn't a time the way normal people mean it. It's a doorway. She tries to quit after that, tells herself it's over, tells herself she can't be the person who sits in a basement while the highway steals families. But the number follows her. On the microwave when she wakes too early, on the gas pump when she refuses to look up, on her car clock drifting to 211 as if it's being gently corrected. Then, months later, she's back on nights. Not because she wants to be, because some part of her needs to know if the desert will do it again. Needs to know if that word return was a warning or an instruction. One shift, the phone never rings at all. No incoming lines, no radio chatter, no wind noise through the vents. The basement becomes so still it feels staged. Leona sits there with her headset on, listening to nothing, and starts to understand what being watched actually means. Not a gaze, but a presence arranging the world around you. At 211, her monitors flicker just once. Not a power surge, not a glitch, a blink. And then, without sound, without language, without any place for it to travel from, a message settles into her mind with the calm certainty of something that has done this many times before. We heard you. Soon, you will hear us. Leona doesn't scream. That's the worst part. She just sits there, frozen, because she knows what comes next is not another missing car. It's not another distressed caller. It's the moment the thing on Route 54 stops using the highway as a hunting ground and starts using her. What makes Route 54 terrifying isn't the triangle, it's 211, a repeatable timestamp like something learning the same doorway. The calls carry panic, not location, as if where doesn't matter. Devices don't fail naturally, they get quietly overridden. The word return doesn't warn, it commands. Mile 277 feels less like an incident and more like a demonstration. And we heard you. Soon you will hear us isn't an ending, it's a countdown. If your phone rang at 2:11 a.m. and the voice sounded almost human, would you hang up or listen? Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a time that kept following you? What was it?